Thank you, and good afternoon. We're back to conclude today's budget, FY23 budget hearing. This afternoon, we will have the Department of License and Inspection and the Department of Water. If we are ready to proceed, Mr. McDermott, our first witness to testify is?
The first witness to testify is L&I Commissioner Ralph DiPietro.
Thank you. Commissioner, how are you?
Well, sir, how are you?
Good. I'm great. Well, thank you. Thank you for being on. If you could just give your name, state your name for the record, and proceed with your testimony, and we'll get into questioning.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council President Clark and members of City Council. I'm Ralph DiPietro, Commissioner of Licenses and Inspection. I'm joined today by several members of my executive team, and I'm pleased to provide testimony on the Department of Licenses and Inspections Fiscal Year 2023 operating budget. The department continues to drive innovation and process improvements through several key technology initiatives. In FY23, L&I will continue to execute our continuous improvement plan of the Eclipse web-based license and permitting platform through monthly updates that incorporate staff and customer feedback. At the same time, L&I will continue to grow its online chat help program, which already provides customer assistance 2,500 times a month to very great reviews. Another key initiative for FY23 is the development of a new online Permit Wizard project in partnership with the Commerce Department. Permit Wizard will work something like a TurboTax for permitting. It will extract information about the scope of a planned project through a series of straightforward questions and return a customized response detailing which permits are needed, the application requirements, and an estimate of permit costs and an approval timeline. For the department's inspectional staff, innovation has been driven through a new mobile program. With the mobile phone and the quality app, the L&I inspectors are logging inspection results, uploading evidence, and writing notices of violation directly from the field. The department will finalize the rollout of our site violation notice program. SVN site violation notices are a new type of violation that can be issued to property owners, business license holders, or trade license holders. And SVNs give the L&I inspectors an enforcement tool that imposes consequences for readily correctable violations while saving inspector and court resources for the more serious and complex cases. Inspectors will have mobile printers to facilitate the immediate issuance of SVNs, and all that data will be fully integrated into our Eclipse system. Also in FY23 License and Inspection plans to pilot our first virtual inspection program designed to increase inspector efficiency and help with reaching harder to access locations. This integrated solution will make audio, video, and notes from virtual inspections, and it'll make them available online to department staff minutes and literally moments after the completion of the inspections. L&I spent a tremendous amount of time in data that's already available to the public through our L&I and the city websites, Open Data Philly. The FY23, the department will further add to this transparency by adding new useful data to the existing tools. Our licensed contractor lookup tool will now provide contractor violation history. The department will begin publishing building certification information through Atlas so that the public can look up multifamily or commercial building compliance with testing requirements for fire protection systems. And in addition, L&I is embarking on a project to transcribe historic permit information and code requirements into Eclipse to better address the challenges of Philadelphia's older building stock. Fiscal year 23 will see L&I hire outside experts to provide professional services for racial equity coordination, surveys, and training. Specific racial equity projects include establishing an employee development program focused on leadership development and the well-being of employees of color. There's training for employees, supervisors, and management on racial equity concepts. The development of career ladders will be reviewed to identify and remove unnecessary barriers to promotion for employees of color. And the department will also identify, map, and track service delivery data disaggregated by race and or proxies for race. And that includes poverty level. L&I will continue its partnership with Community College of Philadelphia to diversify its construction inspection staff and help L&I hire more qualified inspectors. Work is already underway between LNI and CCP to incorporate the technical code enforcement coursework into CCP's existing associate degree program in construction management. This partnership will promote the code enforcement profession to young, diverse population, city residents, and qualify them for the LNI building inspector or civil service examination. And lastly, we're committed to fulfilling our core public safety mission by taking down eminently dangerous buildings. The proposed budget will allow LNI to continue our aggressive public demolition program with approximately $9.5 million in recurring general funding and an estimated $2.25 million recurring demolition funding generated from a new Philadelphia County Demolition Fund fee. And before I close, I'd like to recognize the many hardworking employees at LNI for their commitment to public safety. I thank you for the opportunity to present our proposed fiscal year 2023 budget, and I'm available to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner, thank you and your team for your prompt response to us in council. Nothing like being able to call a commissioner at LNI, particularly when you're out walking the streets with residents. We were out there last Friday on a part of my district, and when you have those commissioners and their team out there, it makes life a lot easier for members of the City Council of Philadelphia. So we appreciate you guys being out there. Got a couple of quick questions. And you referenced the demo fund briefly, and that our understanding is particularly targeted for commercial buildings. Is that your understanding? Or commercial quarters?
As I understand it, it's permitted for blight reduction, which we see as demolishing
generally
buildings in general, correct?
Yeah.
But we also use that fund for some of the other blight reduction measures we take, some of the cleaning and what we call site improvement. So it's not just building demolitions. It's really a blight reduction tool.
All right. So when you say site improvements, because that's a question that has come up, it's a lot of money, and we appreciate the fact that we're going to be in a position to raise money, hopefully, if we get this tax passed. Realistically, what's the likelihood of being able to prep a site? Or is site improvement simply demolishing the building and eliminating the blight by removing the bricks and flattening the ground? That's an improvement on the site. In most cases.
We use site improvement to sort of, it covers a wide variety of things. Sometimes site improvements might be the installation of fencing after a demolition.
Okay.
It might be the cleaning of a construction site, something that we've done in the past and we probably need to do more of. I'm sure you've heard from constituents how problematic construction sites can be. That's one of the things we'd like to see. We'd like to see that money used for.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, no, we get a lot of requests for that, and we appreciate the fact that hopefully we'll be in a position to have more resources. I want to talk to you about Eclipse, something that's been going on for a couple of years now. And early on in the process, we must tell you, we get complaints from people when you change things and you do things different. So the people are encouraging everyone to use Eclipse versus going down in the basement of the MSB building. COVID hit, the basement in the MSB building was pretty much off-site. But I got to tell you that there are a lot of contractors, particularly small contractors that are old school, not necessarily savvy as it relates to using technology, i.e. Eclipse and other quote-unquote more efficient ways of getting permits and authorization to do their work. And then there was this other issue around the language barrier. We have a lot of individuals in the city of Philadelphia that still have challenges with language, English as a first language. How have we been able to accommodate the people that are not savvy enough to use Eclipse to the fullest? Because I don't want to leave these folks out. Because I remind people that it wasn't too long ago that I actually had a BlackBerry, so I'm one of those folks to some degree that had some limitations on technology.
Understood and agree wholeheartedly. What in terms of contractors, we do a couple things. One is we make all the using Eclipse videos available right from the department's website, so they can go on there and sort of follow through a training program and see how to use it. We find that about upwards of 90, in some cases 95% of all the applications are done online. So a really large part of the industry adopted the online platform. I'll be frank, I thought that would take us years to do, but in reality, I think in many cases the pandemic actually helped because it accelerated the need to do business remotely. In a weird way, it was a benefit. So the first thing we always say is, go to the website, ton of information, videos there on how to use Eclipse, and it's broken down by various subjects. And the other thing is, what the folks downstairs in our development section launched was an online assistant, so they can make virtual appointments to help them fill out an application, answer questions, or decide exactly what's needed. Now that's both virtual and in person. They can choose whichever one they want. We definitely saw an increase. This is Q1, and so it's one of our busiest years in the concourse. But they've been able to really handle the influx. Now, as I said, 95% of the applications are being done online, so it's drastically reduced what the concourse looks like. For all you may remember, it wasn't unusual to see 500 people down there in a given day. Numbers are nowhere near there, but they're able to provide this virtual appointment, which is one of a couple different ways that they can connect with the department. So I typically suggest go online, schedule an appointment. They're broken down depending on what you want to do. If you're trying to get a license or you need to apply for a permit, and you'll actually meet with one of our plans examiners or a supervisor or someone from our remote support staff that can help you walk through the process. With respect to the language, we've got some work to do there. We're looking at a couple different things. Our scheduling tool allows you to make appointments. That's actually in 3 different languages. But there's a lot of other documents from L&I that need to be translated. The Eclipse system has the ability to be translated into different languages. Very costly, but that's something that we're working through. And we're working with partners in different city agencies who actually have expertise in translating documents. The Office of Immigrant Affairs and is currently looking for an operations transformation grant to sort of assist with that. So there's multiple things that we're participating in because it really is a much larger citywide effort, and L&I needs to be part of that.
Okay, good. Commissioner, I guess in FY22, there was about $650,000 was added to the L&I budget for violence reduction, cleaning lots and things of that nature. And one, do you think this was, and I know it's not a lot of money, but marginally successful? And 2, most importantly from my perspective, what was the level of coordination between L&I that had that responsibility in addition to other responsibilities on blight remediation and lots? Streets department that has a relationship with, particularly with front-end loaders are required. CLIP and PHS, Horticulture Society, that subcontracts out to these groups. Were you guys coordinating in any way, shape, or form?
So we have our director of the Clean and Seal Union, a gentleman by the name of Dimitri Lambert. Dimitri participates in those weekly meetings. He was primarily responsible for the response to those areas, and his Clean and Seal team. Not only, typically vacant lots are handled by CLIP, and they're very, very good at that. They're very efficient when it comes to handling vacant lot cleanings. So L&I's role was really more about demolishing dangerous buildings and sealing buildings that became vacant and open. I think it was pretty successful in terms of the L&I response. Obviously, there's much more work to do there. And I found that generally cooperation was really great. The police were very supportive. Of course, we need their assistance in many of these cases. I think what you saw there is L&I ran out of things to do in terms of like the initial impact, demolishing dangerous buildings and sealing stuff up. Deputy Commissioner Castillo and I went through there a couple of weeks ago to take a look. We saw a few of the buildings were reopened, buildings that we had previously sealed reopened. So we have to continue to have some presence, specifically in those areas. I'm talking specifically about Kensington at this point. So I think that money was used smartly, because we know that there's a definite correlation between those kinds of quality of life things and crime. We've seen that proven time and time again. So we're happy to participate in those future endeavors in terms of our clean and seal teams and our cleanup. But But I think that was an interesting program to participate in, and I'd hope that we can sort of expand on that in the coming years in terms of bringing that to scale. Because one thing the last couple of weeks has shown us that we're seeing a bit of an uptick in vacant and open buildings again. Right. This hadn't happened for the previous 2 years. The numbers were pretty stagnant. But over the past couple of months, I've been watching that that number of complaints is going up. So something's definitely going there. We have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, Commissioner, it sounded like you said in your last response that you were running out, that you guys ran out of things to do. I didn't hear that, did I? Because if that's I got a list for you. I have it over in your office tomorrow.
And we ran out of, in terms of that, particularly the Operation Pinpoint area. There was only so many dangerous buildings we could tear down, but you're right. There's never. I'm
gonna get you a list just in case you ever get to a point where you ran out of things to do.
Absolutely.
All right. Last but not least, I know last year's budget there was a significant conversation around L&I, and it sounds like that's successful. L&I in the career courses as it relates to CCP, moving people into municipal employment. How many of your existing L&I employees, or if you have that number, that have gone to CCP or expressed an interest in participating in the courses?
Well, we haven't launched the courses yet. We anticipate sending all of them through at some point, because there's a lot of, it's not just for the folks that are coming in new, although that's important and necessary, both as I mentioned, to diversify our construction inspection staff, but also to give them a much stronger baseline when they come in to become L&I inspectors. But a lot of that coursework is going to be beneficial to our existing staff. So it's our hope that we could put a great majority of those folks through as they either promote to higher levels within the department, higher levels of authority and higher levels of in the inspection class, and also as continuing education, because that's another, we pay for inspectors to get continuing education and maintain their certifications. And so once we have the CCP program, we'd like to be able to utilize that for that as well, because it's there, it's readily available, and we trust that they'll be able to provide a really good product and really good content for the current inspectors and the future ones.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner. I'll come back on the next round. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President and Commissioner DiPietro. It is great to see you. I want to start where Council President Clark started. Thank you for being hands-on and on the ground and all of the work that you do. I also want to say a special thanks to members of the team, Betsy Baldwin, and if I chop the names up, y'all charge it to my head and not my heart, Commish. Betsy Baldwin and Sarah Adamo, that's for legislation and complex constituent matters. Lisa Adams for assistance with permitting and quality of life. Maureen Blaney from the vending unit. It may sound lightweight, but when we have illegal vending situations and questions, she's on it. Commissioner, a person can own a building and be paying rent, and then somebody comes up and sets up an illegal vending table right next door to your business, selling the same merchandise cheaper because they don't have to pay the overhead. Maureen is on that. Renee Reinhardt and the team in the Nuisance Property Unit for their assistance continued throughout the pandemic. They did not slow down to address those nuisance businesses in our community. Raynell, who is in law, but she was just with us in a tour on 5th Street that Councilmember Gilmore Richardson organized, along with a lieutenant in the 35th, Wareed Bissarat, because whenever we're dealing with the L&I issues and we're trying to get a nuisance establishment closed, we need to have a police officer with them, because it can become very dangerous when we're talking about closure of a building. He is essential to the 35th. Melvin, I'm not even going to try it, Melvin Carasquella, I hope I said it right, and Mike Toys for meeting with the community group at our request to discuss some legislation. And Commissioner, I don't know about you, but when you start where I started in this business, it's important to recognize the people who we don't see, but who get the work done. With that being said, Commissioner, I want to head straight into inspector vacancies. I'm going to be having a hearing coming up this Monday or Tuesday, because we need to shine a light on it. I appreciate your talking about the work workforce development, the connection with CCP, and not only just to bring new people in, but for professional development, right? So that our existing team can continue to gain knowledge. Tell us about your current number of vacancies and how does this compare to prior years? Tell us currently now, how many vacancies as it relates to inspectors do you have?
Presently, we have about 53 inspector vacancies.
Okay.
That's not counting the 20 that we brought in early March. So we have 20 inspectors that are going through the process now, as you recall. And let me just say thank you for recognizing those folks. That was absolutely awesome. It's great to hear that, and it's nice to know that their work is appreciated. I certainly do. The inspectors that are currently in the training program will take several months of classroom instruction, of peer interaction. They'll go out with senior inspectors, and then we'll deploy them strategically as they become certified to do their job.
So you say, Commissioner, about 6 months or a year, like before the onboarding process, would you say 6 months or a year?
Yeah, for code enforcement inspectors, we typically have them out in the field at full performance in about 6 months. Construction inspectors tend to take a little bit longer. That can go up to a year, and that's largely due because they need to have many more certifications under state law in order to do their job. So we do get them out sooner to assist because the numbers are sort of low right about now.
Commissioner, when you talk about that workforce and bringing other people in almost every department, we heard about the need to attract new employees and new employees because so many folk are retiring or just deciding that, hey, I can go make more money in the private sector. Forget the healthcare and the benefits that used to be the added value for working in local government. How old is your workforce, would you say, and how many retirees do you have on deck over the next few years? Is that a challenge for you?
It definitely is. It changes depending on the unit. The construction inspections, for example, tends to very often be folks that are on their second career.
Yes.
We know full well we may have many of those inspectors for 5-7 years, but that's typically the maximum. You're absolutely right. I can tell you in my 20-some years with city government, I've never seen city employees. This is a good thing and a bad thing. They're leaving the department, but they're leaving because they're valuable to these outside entities. And probably for the first time in a long time, the city's really not able to compete with these private companies that are paying our claims examination engineers, our construction inspectors, our code enforcement inspectors. And so we are losing. That's something that's not happened to in any real measurable way, at least in my career.
Wow. Now, Commissioner, you just mentioned construction. I saw something on Axios, right? It was talking about 900 new construction permits that were issued in December in 2021. They said that in a typical month, right, the department issues about 150. Then at the end of 21, they said more than 2,600 permits were issued for the year compared with approximately 1,600 typically approved. I'm listening to your numbers and you talk about the need for staffing. How are you handling that record number of new construction projects we're seeing? And tell me about the strain that is put on L&I and your ability to do what you should be doing, right? Overseeing the projects, but it's a strain when you lack the appropriate staffing.
So right now the conversation is not just about hiring, but it's also about retention. Because, as you might imagine, with all those additional construction projects in the planning stages, or at least haven't gotten the permits, it won't be long before they move into the construction phase. And the folks that we typically would hire as inspectors are also very much attracted to those folks, those construction companies, and our claims engineers as well. So we're also likely to lose some of those folks in that. Now, we're definitely seeing an increase in the amount of inspections scheduled per day. Right now, it's about 300 inspections a day, give or take.
300 per day. Okay.
300 per day for our construction inspections. That's only construction inspection. There's around 45 of those inspectors on any given day, right? Figure we have some leave time, sick, whatever it may be. So about 45 inspectors.
Okay.
So that kind of translates to somewhere around 5 to 7 stops a day per inspector. Now that's doable, and our folks, the construction inspectors that are remaining, are doing an absolutely phenomenal job. I mean, they really are. They're in a world that moves very quickly. They're in a world that's very complicated. It gets complex very, very quickly. They're dealing with a huge variety of people, from very, very novice to extremely experienced. And so they do a tremendous job. But in the event that we do see all those permits we issued in December come to fruition, there could be some challenges in terms of our ability to meet the demand. And that's really the key.
Well, Commissioner, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm looking forward to sort of getting a lot of this stuff on the record, obviously, because we're in the midst of this budget process, but really peeling back the layers, of it all when we have this hearing. I heard the bell, Commissioner. Let me just end with this question. And this is one that's, I know, near and dear to all of our hearts, and it's the issue of fire safety. One of the things and questions that I've gotten from several people is to talk about L&I's role in inspecting those rental properties for fire code violations, and does L&I need a complaint from a tenant in order to act? And when you look at just this overall issue, I don't have to reference all of the tragedies that, I mean, we will never forget that occurred, but are doing our best in every way, shape, or form to be preventive and get as much preventive materials, like in the form of smoke alarms, out to people. But you document, well, just quickly if you can, Commish, walk us through what L&I's role is in inspecting those properties and whether or not you need a complaint from a tenant in order to act. Thank you. And I'm going to go on mute and listen.
So typically our response to rental properties, unless they're located in a high-rise building or one of our other pilots, is driven by a complaint. Someone contacts 311 or uses either by phone or online, and provide some content about what they see, what they find, what they believe is wrong, and then we dispatch an inspector to inspect. Rental inspection program is a very, very big undertaking. There are ways that we can, and we've looked at this in a number of different ways. And I don't want to take up all the time at this particular hearing, so I'm happy to talk about this in greater detail if you'd like. But a rental program from a city employee sort of department perspective would be an enormous undertaking. The numbers are very large, because we're talking about, if you can believe the census data, you're talking about maybe 300,000 units located across the city. To inspect all of those, at least to do an inspection on all those in at least once a year, you're talking probably 200 plus additional L&I inspectors. That's not counting supervisory staff, office, facility, logistics, law department staff to handle the warrants and cases that'll be necessary. But there are other things that we might be able to do that I'm happy to talk about and work through. As I said, we've been looking at this literally for years and trying to figure out a way to increase enforcement around rental properties, but without going to the sort of nuclear option of hiring several hundred L&I inspectors.
Thank you so very much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President, and thank you so much, Commissioner DePietro. Echo the sentiments of my colleague, our Majority Leader, Councilmember Parker, and thanking the entire team over at L&I, knowing that we all have worked very closely over the last year and a half on all the initiatives that we've worked on together, all the drug paraphernalia tours. Even this past week, we had your Deputy Commissioner out with us, and Renee, and Councilmember Parker's district in the 9th district, and we went to the 4th Council District, the 5th Council District, the 6th Council District, and you have just been there. And I especially want to take note of the tour we were at together in August of 2021, and that one I know was the roughest one we had, but you stayed with us after sundown, into the dark, into the night, and you were just phenomenal. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you have done with us around addressing nuisance businesses and stores that are illegally selling drug paraphernalia across our city. And you know that we've submitted 77 stores for your review and inspection, and 22 of those stores have either been fully seized for drug paraphernalia sales or other violations. And then we have the stores that, you know, we have to continue to address, but 7 stores were seized in the court appeal process. So I just wanted to say thank you. I look forward to continuing to work with you and the entire team as we address this issue around nuisance businesses in the city. But I wanted to quickly follow up on the questioning that our majority leader started, and you talked about inspector vacancies, 53 inspector vacancies, not including the 20 new inspectors that were hired in March that are in process. And you talked about the need for staffing, and we know that that is a challenge everywhere. I think it's called the Great Resignation is what some of the folks are calling this period of time. And so you talked about also 3 construction inspections per day, 45 inspectors, 5 to 7 stops per day per inspector. So could you talk about, just for the record and for the public, how many inspectors do we have total? How many are dedicated specifically to the construction unit?
So presently, the number of inspectors is hovering around 115. There's about 58 in our construction inspection divisions.
And how many are you budgeted for? So could you tell me how many you have and then how many you're budgeted for?
I believe the number is we have 425 budgeted positions. It's a little difficult getting to the exact number of inspectors because we use them in different ways. So some of our inspectors work in plan review, so they're not actually budgeted as inspectors, but they're inspector roles. But we're specifically talking about 100 inspectors, the true inspectors, folks that work in the field conducting inspections.
Okay, and you said 58 of them are in the construction division.
58, yeah, they're in our construction inspection.
Okay, and then have you all ever done a comparison looking at other large U.S. cities like New York and like Chicago and others to see where we compare relative to the amount of inspectors we have in the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah, in years past, we used to look at that. We looked at other cities, and there is some information that generally building departments use. And what the ideal number seems to be about 6 construction inspections a day per inspector seems to be the ideal. Now, for many years before Eclipse, we didn't have the technology to be able to, believe it or not, determine what that, like how many calls we were getting a day. Scheduling was handled by the individual inspector. So you would call your inspector and he or she would schedule the inspection. Now it's all done through an automated system, so we can actually count that. So we know we get right around that 6 number. As I said, it goes from 5.5 to 7.2. So we know that that's about it. But the thing here is that in terms of L&I staffing, it's really about where do you want to go? Like, what are your priorities and how do you want to take that? We can meet that demand with the current amount of staffing. Now, if that demand goes up, if we want to expand that to do some of the stuff that we're hoping to do in the coming year, like the construction site cleanups and things like that, we're going to need some additional staff to do that. And that's typically how we put our new inspectors.
Okay, so then if we could talk about that a bit relative to what's in your current proposed Class 100 schedule. Are you requesting additional funding for an increase in the number of inspectors you have, particularly on the construction side, recognizing the amount of permits we know that folks are applying for?
We didn't ask for additional construction inspectors because we have 2 groups of 20 coming in, 10, which basically means 20 construction, 20 code enforcement inspectors, and that's about the max that we can handle in a given time frame. We just don't have the resources to. Remember, as I said earlier, when you bring in inspectors, there's all this other stuff you need to do. You need to build up your training unit, your HR, and all the equipment that goes that, and the support that we get from OIT and other departments. So this year, between now and the end of the year, calendar year, we'll bring in 20 building inspectors and 20 code enforcement inspectors, and that pretty much maxes us out in terms of how many we can process through our training, our current training and and existing HR spaces. Now,
Okay, so if we were to add more, then we would need to increase the training unit and HR's ability from a L&I perspective to handle additional caseload of bringing additional folks into the system. Is that correct? So it would not just be an increase in construction inspectors, but it would also be an increase for training and development and for human resources capacity.
correct, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know. My next question is relative to building inspections that are done when inspectors visit a job site. And so how soon after a building code violation is reported does an inspector actually visit the site? And this is something that we're getting all across the city, just with the influx of construction that's happening. And so what happens at that point?
So typically when we find out, there's two types of construction inspection. There's the normal permit inspection where the contractor calls for a footing or a foundation or a framing. There's those. And then there's those where the public calls in with a complaint. Hey, they're not following the code. They're leaving material on the sidewalk. Typically, we have established SLAs, and they range anywhere from 3 days to 20 days. In the vast majority of cases, the inspectors are getting there within a few days' time. They very rarely get all the way up to the SLA, especially on the construction side, because they don't get that many complaints as compared to our code enforcement, which gets a large number of complaints. Now, what we're going to be doing different in FY23, we're going to be reconfiguring a little bit with this additional staff to have folks more readily address complaints, more fully and more quickly address complaints, specifically ones where people allege that they're working without a permit. Complaints if they're exceeding the permit, that'll have to go to the existing inspector because those are much more complicated. But ones where the complaints are that they don't have a permit at all, it's our intention to create a sort of a lighter unit. Lighter meaning they move more quickly because they're not attached to a specific project, so they can respond more quickly. And their focus is going to be site safety and responding to complaints from the public to make sure we fully and fairly vet the complaints, because that's one of the things that we often hear, that the public, they may not know the building code, but they know what work looks like, and they're typically giving us good information, and we're not getting there or we're not fully vetting that, and that's something we'll change in this coming year.
Okay, that'll be great. I heard the bell, so I'll come back on the second round, but I thank you for notating the process around how high of a priority the complaints will be when they do not have a permit, and that there will be a new process for that in the upcoming fiscal year. I'll circle back on the second round for my next round of questions, but thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you to your entire team for all the work you all have done with us over the last year. We are just so appreciative of you and look forward to continuing to work with each and every one of you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Brooks.
Thank you, Council President. Hello. I wanted to follow up about a 2018 bill that would allow tenants to learn more information about their landlords. I know the bill required more transparencies for those landlords that purchase their properties using the LLC. Do you have a sense of when the beneficial owner / natural person info for LLC registration with L&I for rental licenses will be updated or uploaded to the One Data Philly data set?
So there's a number of different things, sort of connected things that we're trying to put onto the website or upload so the tenants can have more access up front. Things like certifications and stuff like that. The natural persons bill, I know that was effective in January. We have a software developer that's actually working. The goal is you have to
additional parking would look like under I-95, and then
I'm sorry. So we're working with our software developer, to sort of create the location for that to load up into our Eclipse system. So that's not done yet. I don't have an actual date for when that's completed, but I will absolutely get that and get it back to you.
Okay, because as you know, my office is working on housing issues, and I wanted to acknowledge our legal intern, Kate Underwood, who has been doing some background research on home ownership and landlord trends in Philadelphia. And one thing that has come up while doing the research is that tenants in the city are still having a hard time even identifying their landlords, and that legislation passed back in 2018, and the public is expecting to be able to access that information. So if you could please keep my office in the loop, because we were told that this data would be available in May or June, and that, it would be appreciated when you guys get it uploaded and ready, that we have this information so we can continue to help our constituents.
I believe it's fair to say we're looking at probably 6 months.
6 months out from now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Councilman.
Council President, that I end my question.
Good, Councilman. Okay. You good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome, sir.
Because of the long nature of these hearings, you must multitask. But you better.
Understood.
I want to thank the commissioner for, like my colleagues, recognizing that you are an integral part of us being able to do our jobs. There's nothing like being on a community walk with L&I and being able to say, look at a complaint and actually have it addressed with a expertise that your people have. I agree with Member Gilmore Richardson. There's nothing like dealing with problematic businesses and to be able to say, but based on the rule book, you're doing this right, that wrong, please correct it. Those things empower us to help people. So for that, we are grateful. I have to ask, similar to my colleague's question, there is a belief by some that there are people who can get by inspections, particularly centered around construction, centered around one's ability to be compliant. That worries me in a number of fashions. As someone who served as co-chair for the Demolition Special Committee on Demolition due to the collapse of the building on 22nd and Market, I am keenly aware of what OSHA regs do for the safety of not only the workforce on a construction site, but the citizens that walk around on construction sites. And we can never have a situation where developers or construction managers know that we are in a good position never to get inspected. There has to be a degree of regularity of those inspections and a degree of non-predictability of when someone's going to be inspected. I say all that to say, how many boots on the ground do we need to add to you so that can be accomplished?
It's a bit of a difficult question to answer. I think what we'll do is, I mentioned to Councilmember Gilmore Richardson in that the reestablishment of that construction site group. I think what the plan there is, and I don't want to necessarily give away the whole strategy behind it, but the plan is to do exactly what you're saying, to have to sort of flood an area with inspectors from the department whose sole purpose is to evaluate the safety of that site and the quality of life sort of things that the neighbors might be dealing with. Parking space, construction vehicles and parking spaces, fencing falling down, trash and debris piled up on the sidewalks blocked that shouldn't be, all that sort of thing. I think what we'll see is, the idea behind that is to get them in there. They will be unannounced inspections. We're going to, like I said, we'll work in a specific area. And then what that will do is that'll develop a sort of a metric for us to be able to determine how many people do we need to staff something like that, where we could do that citywide on a regular basis. Because again, they're also doing some complaint response. I don't want to necessarily, as I said, say where we're going to go initially.
I can relate to that. But the predictability part is, do you do inspections on weekends?
Not the construction inspection. So there's an inspector. There's two groups of inspectors that work weekends. Our emergency response inspectors, they typically handle structure-related problems, collapses, fires. And then we have our nuisance group that handles code enforcement things, nuisance properties, those sorts of things.
So the word on the street, and I do air quotes with it, is that if I bring in a crew of folk to work on a house on the weekend, there's no chance of getting stopped, cease work, anything like that. So I could work well into the night, overnight. You know, it doesn't matter what the neighbors think, and because nobody's coming out to check my site. We cannot have that predictability as a city. And a question I would have is, for all of these violations, for these people operating without proper permits, how much is the city losing in revenue?
In terms of, so when we catch them, that's a different thing. When we catch them, we know sort of what the permit fee is, because it's the permit fee, and that fee is double as part of the penalty for working without a permit. If we don't catch them, it's difficult to know. I've heard estimates all over the place, but more often, the example that you're giving, it sounds more like, you know, the work would be visible even if you did it on Tuesday. If we showed up on Tuesday, we'd be able to see the work. But what I think you're suggesting is more about the contractors that are sort of working on weekends into the night and then disappearing and moving to the next project. That's a bigger problem, because what happens, and I'm sure you've seen this, the homeowner is the one that gets the violation because we don't catch the contractor working on Saturday night. Because unless it gets to the police or one of our emergency inspector levels, we won't know about it, but we'll follow up, say, on a Monday or Tuesday. So the issue is really the contractors.
So it's a little more, it's that and then some. There is a belief that there are crews out of New York coming in here, doing what they do, and then escaping on I-95 North. And I worry twofold. I worry about whether or not people are getting the proper work that needs to be done, whether the OSHA issues are addressed, and whether or not we as a municipality are losing revenues because these folks aren't following the rules, paying the fees, and escaping into the night with our profits and revenues. So what would it take to deal with the problem? How do we hire a night crew, a weekend crew? How do we adjust to what insidious people are doing to us to be able to kind of check them?
I suppose there's a couple of things we could look at, and certainly expanding our weekend presence and having inspectors available to be, whether they're being called by the police or 911 or fire boards, whatever. That's something we can do. We can consider some shift adjustments. Right now, it's difficult, as we mentioned, because we don't, the inspector coverage is sort of low, and pulling them away from the day shift, the normal inspection stuff would be problematic because we have to service those those permits. But I suppose there's a couple different things we could probably look at, and maybe at least in a pilot program to see exactly how big of a problem it is.
Well, I appreciate that response. I look forward to that kind of addressing of the problem, because there are certain neighborhoods that are exploding with construction. They're not even you can ride down there from a year ago and say, well, where did this neighborhood come from? But I don't think there's a corresponding measure of, and I'll end on this. We're looking at a ton of new projects coming from infrastructure money coming from the federal government. We're looking at a boom of private sector development anyway. We have to get you ready to be able to receive that influx of activities. I know you're inspecting more and differently than you did 10 years ago. You're doing way more, and I don't know if you're doing it with the proper resources. So I join my colleagues in that concern. When you do your job, you keep us safe. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President, and good afternoon, Commissioner.
Thanks, sir.
How are you? And I want to join the chorus of how responsive you've been and the great job you and your team have been doing at L&I. It's really great to see it. So thank you so much for that. Let me ask you a question. How long have you been in this position now?
I took over when former Commissioner Perry left in October of 21. October of 20, I'm sorry.
October 20. So it's been a year and a half, roughly. And are you the commissioner or you're the acting commissioner at this point?
Technically, I'm the acting commissioner.
So just, I think of acting like you're trying out for a part, right? And I think after a year and a half, I think you earned the part, so we should probably consider taking out the acting at this point because you've been doing a great job. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, I have to ask you a question on the applications. I know you had a flood of applications because we changed the tax abatement at the end of last year. So a couple questions. What's been going on in January, February, and March as far as applications for new construction? Is it at a much lower level, or how are you seeing the applications coming in?
So we definitely saw a drop off from December. That's for sure. December hit a high that we've not seen. But I can tell you simply from just our regular reporting that we do in terms of revenue, that zoning permits are still high. That was a bit of a shock. We expect those to go down. They go up, but that's always a good thing. Zoning typically is preceded by construction permits. Revenues are still surprisingly strong. We're about 17% up over last year. Most of that is driven by the permit activities. It's the number from 2020, I believe the number was almost from 2020 to 2022 it was up 21%. And from last year, it's 17%. So it's still pretty strong. And right now is our busiest time of year because this is when people tend to renew their rental licenses, and there's a whole lot of activity. So I suspect to see some pretty strong revenues. I think, obviously, building permits will level out, but they're still higher than we've expected. And
right.
We're both pleased, but also sort of anxious.
Any forecasts in your opinion, strictly your opinion, on the number of applications or permits that were pulled for the abatement? Do you think we'll see 90% actually occur, 50%? Any thoughts on that?
I was in the 50% field some time ago. I feel perhaps we'll see more than that now. I feel some level of confidence, and I'm basing this on the fact that we're having a difficult time hiring. We put a few RFP out for specific engineering, and we couldn't get very many responses or any responses at all. And that's an indicator that the market is still healthy and there's still better opportunities for these firms. So I'm optimistic that we'll see better than 50% of those projects built.
Well, keep in mind that we have seen in the last 3-4 months mortgage rates close to double, from 2.75 to 5.25, 5.5. So that's going to double the monthly cost for many of our homeowners and make it a little more difficult to buy.
Yep. One of the things that we're looking at now is we're trying to measure the time frame between when we issue a permit to when it's finally CO'd. The purpose of that is so we could work towards reducing that, and maybe if we could shorten the construction time, the construction schedule, that might help offset those additional costs. Maybe that'll be something that'll make us more attractive. It's something we should do anyway. It could be something that makes us more attractive to other areas on the East Coast where these folks might take that money.
That's a great thing to do. So I applaud that. Let me ask you a separate question. I'm hearing about staffing issues, and understanding there's different inspectors do all types of different work in the city. And understanding it might be difficult because every department's having staffing issues, and so is the whole country for that matter, not just Philadelphia. Are there outside companies that are Philadelphia-based, and I want to say that strongly, Philadelphia-based, so they're Philadelphia companies, who could maybe assist you in doing either some of the lower-level work or whatever work you think you could offload to them to allow our inspectors to do more of the maybe serious inspections? Or, is there a way to combine outside contractors, basically, that are Philadelphia-based with our pool of people we have in your department so we can provide more public safety?
There are actually a couple different things we can do in terms of when we're talking construction inspections. It's a little bit different on the code enforcement side. For construction inspections, we're looking to, as I mentioned in the opening comments there, the remote pilot. it's our hope that that is a real productivity boost because an inspector's not traveling from site to site. As you know, we spend a lot of time. In fact, in my earlier comments, when I mentioned about 5 to 7 inspections a day, just construction inspections, that's typically like 6 sites. So that inspector, he or she is driving from 6 to 6 different sites. There's a lot of wasted time in that. So we're hoping the remote inspection will help to sort of capitalize on that. We're really taking a look at the number of required inspections that must be conducted, and seeing where we could build some efficiency by either combining them or eliminating the unnecessary inspections, or perhaps using third party to do those. When it comes to the work of the actual construction, the L&I inspectors, it gets a little tricky because that's a unionized workforce, and so we would be talking about something like perhaps an overflow. You know, they get to a certain level, and the overflow would go to a third party. I don't know that there's actually city-based agencies that do that. I know there are agencies that do that, and they do it well. And it's fairly common to use in other parts of the country. Washington, D.C. does it. Our friends in the BIA have sort of mentioned an interest in being able to have an option. So, I mean, it's definitely something worth talking about. It's a smart way to do it in terms of costs to the city, because it's less expensive, and it could save the L&I inspectors for much more, as you mentioned, much more investigative work. Our audits investigation folks, the people that do the investigation into contractors to make sure they're properly licensed and make referrals to revenue when they find contractors that aren't paying the appropriate taxes. That could certainly be bolstered by allowing our city staff to move over to that. So there are definitely a number of things we are doing and can do, but I think there is a time where that's worth a conversation.
Okay. I appreciate that. We'll circle back. I know Councilmember Squilla is also interested in this topic, so we might tag team you after this hearing and come back to you, ask you for some solutions and ideas on how to make it safer for the city. You know, I saw this fire that happened this weekend, and it's such a sad story that they didn't have a smoke detector in this building, and that could have been avoided. Those lives could have been saved. It's just horrible to see that stuff. Anyway, thank you, Commissioner, and I hope my comments are only in the positive, that you're no longer acting, you're acting out the job. You should be the Commissioner. Thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Thomas.
Thank you, Council President, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to first start by saying thank you. I guess I have to say acting commissioner after that line of questioning, but to our leader of our L&I department for the work that you're doing, as well as your team. I have to take a moment to put on my Councilmember Parker hat and give a special shout out to Lisa Adams in the L&I department, who worked very closely with my staff on a number of different issues. As the chair of the Streets and Services Committee, I often get inquiries that one would probably argue should go to a district council person, but we'll never tell a constituent that we can't help them. We always try our best to help our constituents, and we would not be able to help people with some of the L&I issues that we face without the great work of Lisa Adams and all the other people over at L&I. So thank you to all of you. I appreciate you. I just want to get some things on the record as it relates to the memo that my office sent around L&I, and clearly we've had significant dialogue around some of this stuff already. But Commissioner, if you don't mind, if you could just take a minute to talk about your vision as it relates to hiring more staff, as it relates to improving technology, and putting us in a position to really address some of the issues that we know we're facing with the underground economy, as well as the support systems that we talked about being in place with the nightlife economy position. That's my only comment and question, and I'll go on mute and listen to your response. And I just, again, want to say thank you, and thank you, Council President, for giving me the opportunity to make my comment.
Thank you. So there's a couple different things. With respect to the nighttime economy, I think there's definitely some room for the department to sort of participate in a more aggressive stance there. I think what we have, as you recall, we have our nuisance property unit. There's several staff that's assigned permanently, and then they pull from a larger pool of inspection staff. But I'd like to be able to see that shift into a more aggressive and maybe even a larger dual shift unit, a unit that works the day and has a presence at night. Now, we currently do that, but that's mostly through an overtime. So I'd like to see us expand on a potential second shift to support the nighttime economy stuff. I think that's necessary. And the good thing about it, and Council Member Gilmore Richardson knows, part of our paraphernalia inspections. It requires police support. And I think if you're able to sort of coordinate that on a more regular basis, the city will be much more effective in dealing with those. So the nighttime economy, I think it's worth having the conversation and seeing what we can do to provide more support there, and we're certainly willing to do that. With respect to the hiring process, I think two things are happening. That the development of the community college program, I think, is really going to be a game changer for us in terms of opening up that job title to a much larger pool. In very many ways, you could only get, we in advance of that, we revised the job title to sort of make it a little bit easier for folks to get in that didn't from like the non-traditional backgrounds, folks that didn't come from the construction industry but had the skills and knowledge and ability to do the job. And so the CCP program, I think, dovetailed with that change will help our recruiting. Now, we do have some challenges in terms of recruiting, as I mentioned several times, because we're competing with private sectors that can actually provide far better benefits and in terms of pay and company vehicles. And it's always going to be difficult. I'm sure that folks here know that L&I inspectors, as a rule, use their own vehicles, and that's a pretty tough sell. So I think, coupled with a greater outreach in terms of where we're going, who we're talking to, and removing some of those barriers to entry, I think that's a key to L&I's future. More importantly, perhaps, is the internal promotion stuff. What we find is that it's very difficult to hire for those higher level positions in L&I from the outside because there's no direct equivalent. So building people internally to move into those positions. Every time we've done that, it's been an absolute success, and I think we need to continue that. Part of that, again, is the partnership with community college, getting them, whether it be into the certificate program or the degree program that allows them to qualify. And to a much larger effort, the city's looking at reducing some of the higher, sort of the manager level job titles, which would typically require bachelor's degrees, which are really good to have, but in L&I, it's really no substitute for experience. It's really no substitute for the knowledge that our folks build through a career here. So I think those things together will make a much better experience, a much more lasting experience, and help us both encourage and retain to folks to come into this line of work and retain them. When it comes to staffing, the key to consider is really how large do you want to make it. Right now, our staffing is able to keep up with the demand, but I know that that's not necessarily where we want to be. We want to be able to expand the things that we're doing into various areas, into various programs. I think in the near future, I hope to share some of the results from our program inspections on our code enforcement side, which are very neighborhood focused, neighborhood targeted. I think the results from those inspections are going to be people are going to be surprisingly pleased to see what we're doing. So the real question is, how much larger can they be? How much more resources are we willing to put into that? And we're willing to have that conversation. We're ready.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm good to go. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gauthier.
Thank you, Council President, and good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you. My time is short, so I'm going to jump right into my questions. But like other council members, I appreciate your work and the work of your team, especially Lisa Adams. And I also concur that we should just chop the acting off of your title. L&I does not have enough inspectors to adequately respond to the illegal business activity, illegal construction activity, and the blight that plagues parts of our city, especially areas experiencing high levels of gun violence, some of which are in my district. And there's a direct connection between L&I's enforcement capacity, remediating blight and other illegal activity, and a decrease in gun violence. And if we're serious about reducing gun violence and providing equitable city services, we need to give you and your team the resources necessary to hire and maintain a full force of inspectors that can respond to issues that are plaguing our communities. Based on your conversation with Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, I wasn't clear on the number of L&I inspectors assigned to each inspector unit and the number of vacancies. Can you please follow up with council in writing with the number of inspectors broken down by unit and the number of vacancies? And can you also note how many of these inspectors, if any, are used for multiple purposes?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Am I correct that there are 6 L&I inspectors assigned to the West District?
The West District, it depends. So we have 2 units that work out there. We have the construction unit and we have the code enforcement unit. And the West District is actually broken up into 2. It's broken up into our Central West and our regular West.
I'm not talking about West Central, which I understand to be sort of the western part of Center City. I'm talking about West Philadelphia.
So yeah, so the West construction group is 4 construction inspectors, and the code enforcement inspectors, there's 6.
Okay. And how many L&I inspectors in total are assigned to the Central East District, which would be East Center City?
So let me. I'll have to look at that. I'm sorry, I don't have that right away. Central East meaning I'll get you the number of construction inspectors and the number of code enforcement inspectors.
Do you have an estimate, especially as compared to what's going on in West Philadelphia?
Well, I can certainly be Central West, which is University City in that area. It's a fairly large area. It's a much bigger district. So here it is. There's 9 construction inspectors in Central West,
okay.
and 4 code enforcement inspectors.
And what about Central East?
I'm sorry, I'm looking this way.
Okay. I would be, if you could follow up with that information, it would be helpful. How many people work in the nuisance property unit, and how many of those are inspectors?
So the nuisance property unit consists of a supervisor, Renee Reinhardt. There's inspectors that are assigned full-time to the unit, and then there's a list of inspectors that they pull from the districts to do to work overtime. So at any given day, there's 2 inspectors and a supervisor, and then there's a list of inspectors from the rest of the department that can fill in. So every weekend there's at least a team of 2 working the nuisance unit, and there could be anywhere from 10. The inspectors, the overtime is voluntary, so they don't have to do it. There could be a list of 10, it could be a list of 15, and it fluctuates depending on where folks, whether or not they're able to do the overtime, because it's pretty intense, the nuisance property stuff. They're out there Friday night, Saturday night. They're responding at times during the weekend, whatever's needed, and it's always off hours, and it's always sort of risky stuff.
And what's your opinion on the capacity that we have in that unit versus the level of nuisance business activity that we have here in the city? So
that unit's really focused more on nuisances where there's like assemblies. They typically look at illegal and lawful nightclubs where there's lots of people, where there's great potential for danger. Now, when you go down to the nuisance business thing, that encompasses a whole lot of different properties. And those they can change from corner stores that might be selling drug paraphernalia or any number of other things. So it really varies, and those are handled a little bit differently. A lot of that nuisance stuff is really initially identified by the police department. So in response to community concerns or in police investigations, they will escalate that to L&I for potential license action. So we might be doing a license revocation or something like that. The nuisance unit, the stuff that our folks go out on, is really safety related, and sometimes that's the safety of the occupants. It's not only the safety of the surrounding community.
Okay, and what do you think about your current capacity versus the level of activity that we have with all of that nuisance activity, whether we're talking about a nightclub or whether we're talking about a business that's plaguing its surrounding community?
I do have concerns about nuisances, especially nightclubs and the speakeasy types, nuisance businesses in general, because what we've seen recently, as businesses go out of business, as landlords become a little bit more desperate for some level of rent, they're renting to businesses that are not necessarily following rules, and we wind up having to chase them around the city. The real key about that, and I think Councilmember Curtis Jones mentioned this, is being able to get there timely. We can handle those things in 10 days, 20 days, but I don't think that that's really going to help when it's a particular nuisance or something that's particularly dangerous to the public or the occupants. So the real question is, how many people do we need to get there in a timely fashion to be able to get there? And I think that's along those lines of perhaps that second shift that we spoke about detailing some inspectors to work those overtime hours, those nighttime hours, and to be able to be there on a more regular basis.
Okay. You've talked a lot about serious hiring and retention challenges. For retention strategies, I've heard you reference increased salary and potentially providing city cars and increasing internal training opportunities. How much do you estimate it would cost to implement these strategies?
It's sort of difficult. Those are things that we heard. That's information that we gleaned from like exit interviews with some of the staff that left. I have to include sort of workload. I think that's one of the bigger drivers that folks leave the city. They go to private inspection agencies and their workloads tend to be lower. There's a lot, obviously we demand a lot from our inspectors as city employees. So there's a number of different things. It'd be very difficult to know what we're talking about. A vehicle purchases could be quite expensive, and maybe that's something better suited to, as I think Councilmember Don mentioned, a discussion about third-party assistance in terms of taking the more mundane inspections so our folks can concentrate on these other things, these higher priority things, these things that are sort of plaguing communities and nuisances and things like that.
Okay, I'll close out with this. In 2021, Commissioner, according to 311, the 14 zip codes with 78% of the shooting victims submitted 68% of the vacant lot complaints, 68% of the vacant property complaints, and 58% of the property maintenance complaints across the entire city. And so that tells me we're not sending enough city resources to these areas. That includes L&I inspection and follow-up enforcement personnel. Commissioner, from your perspective, I understand that you need to work with what you're allocated, but we need a plan to respond to these issues in areas that are experiencing these severe levels of gun violence. And I hope to follow up on some of these issues later, and I look forward to partnering with you and your team. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Yes, thank you very much, Council President. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, so I wanted to follow up on a number of the questions around the number of inspectors. We really see you on the front lines of public safety. It may not be directly dealing with gun violence or intervening in direct cases, but in terms of overall public safety, we absolutely 100% see you and your team as being on the front lines of that. We also see you as a revenue generator for the city, actually. You're one of the few departments that has the opportunity to leverage fines, to hold entities accountable who are building all across the city at great profit, and who are, and if they are not following the law, breaking the law, you have the not only the opportunity but the obligation to hold them accountable. So on those two fronts, I know a number of my colleagues have raised concerns. Last year, could you share how many inspectors you added to your overall building and code inspectors that you added to your overall pool of staffing?
Last year, we didn't hire any. There were no hires last year at all.
And your written testimony today indicates that you are not currently planning to have any additional budgeted inspectors for FY2023.
Correct. The inspectors that we're bringing in, the two groups of 20, are basically backfilling existing vacancies.
Okay. And so, I guess one of the concerns that we have raised, which you yourself identify, is that it's extremely hard because of the workload and the range of responsibilities for any individual inspector. It's hard to address that workload to make the job more appealing if you're actually not trying to reduce the workload. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a part of it. Workload is definitely, again, in exit interviews we hear over and over that's one of the stressors of the inspection staff. So,
not being able to expand your staffing means not only are you continuing to backfill vacancies, but you're actually potentially not building a sustainable department if you have a high level of turnover of people who get hired, are dissatisfied, or feel overwhelmed with their jobs.
Yeah, the turnover, as I mentioned, is a little bit unusual the past few years. And that's probably consistent with many others, but we saw a significant amount of turnover, much more than I've seen in my career with the department.
Yeah, but I do think that quality of work, and I'm sure your team knows that, one, they take pride of ownership in the work that they do, but also, it's just the city's liable if we don't do it well. Is there a reason then why you are not expanding inspectors or seeking to expand positions? And that may include creative ways to address recruitment, staffing, and retention.
The biggest challenge that we have right now is simply our ability to process someone from an entry level into an inspector role. As I mentioned, we know that we can handle a group of 20 inspectors fairly efficiently, meaning we can get them onboarded, get them the training they need, get them the experience, and deployed where they're helping. The biggest challenge, I think, in addition to the fact that the pool just isn't there, our inspectors are so attractive to the private industry that we're fighting with them to sort of retain, to get new talent. But the real issue, I think, the biggest issue for us is just the internal difficulties that we have processing it. There's only hiring inspectors. For every inspector you see, I often say there's at least 3 other people you don't see. There's people that do all that other stuff, the support work. And it's not just L&I, it's OIT. OIT, we have a very technologically advanced workforce, the laptops and the printers and the phones. This requires support. So, OIT is...
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, look, I am very sympathetic to this issue. It doesn't matter what department we're talking about right now. We're dealing with a massive crisis within the school district of Philadelphia. The only thing that I would urge you to do is that, one, we need to expand the number of inspectors. I just don't think that there's any question you're hearing that. And your job needs to pivot into HR. Our biggest crisis right now is around staffing, is around generating confidence, interest, enthusiasm, and energy around working for the city of Philadelphia, putting on a uniform or a badge or holding those things up and proudly representing the city. That is on our leadership. Those are on our agency. It's on you as commissioner to make that a central priority. I've said that very clearly. It's normally an HR issue. It's now your number one thing. And so I think all of us need to get better at it. But I do worry, and I do feel like the department can't truly address its circumstances if it's frozen at staffing levels that are, one, unbearable for the current workload of your current inspectors, and then two, potentially has the ability to, what I think we're clearly saying is not meeting the need that's out there. I'm going to move on to another question. I mentioned that the department does revenue generation. Last year, how much, because I know you mentioned that you thought your fines were pretty high, how much did you actually bring in revenue last year through fines?
Specifically through fines, I don't know, but I can get the number for you. I can tell you, we categorize this in a couple different ways because fines happen in different places. They happen at the ticket level. They happen at the notice of violation level. Our audits and investigations unit, for example, issues direct fines to contractors. Yeah. I can tell you, I know just offhand, in our audits and investigations unit, just this year so far, they've issued almost $600,000 in fines. So we can get the number of fines we issue and then the number that are actually paid, but it's sort of difficult because that goes over time.
standardly, would you say the fines are like double the permit fees? What are they usually done? I mean, do you feel like the fines are dissuasive? Because my experience, and you've been very good because I know you find some folks around, when I've called in a few and, we follow up a little bit, but it feels like there's a number of developers who feel like they shrug them off. And has there been an interest in looking at fines and the fine structure to make sure that they're appropriately dissuasive, particularly for repeat offenders? And for individuals who pose like great danger. So it's not like, even if you may have a fine, like if it's a repeat offender or if it's somebody in which, there poses great risk, do you have the ability to review that fare structure?
So first, all the fines that are levied by the department are codified. They're within the code. So the class is up to what's permissible by state law. Now, when it comes to developer and contractors, our audits and investigation unit really does have some pretty serious fines. It's $1,000 per day for a violation against the contractor. And that's the unit that I mentioned earlier had almost $600,000 in fines this year. They've been really very aggressive. Now, some additional staffing there will help that in a long way. What I think really is, to your point, fines are good to a point. But when you get that just absolute, disregard for public safety, that needs to be criminal.
Yeah. And how many revocations and suspensions have you issued last year?
Specific to, that's typically
on construction.
Yeah. So I don't have the number off the top of my head. Let me ask Will Fernandez. Can you come on and answer the council member's question?
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Gim.
Good afternoon.
Hi. So in the fiscal year 22, Audits and Investigations has issued 7 license suspensions or license revocations. A few of those were maybe 2 of them were for periods under 6 months. At least one was a permanent revocation, and most of them are 12 months and up. So that's obviously a very significant step when we do take it. We tend to look for instances where there is willful or intentional wrongdoing or risk to public safety created by the contractor's violations. But that's the number in this fiscal year.
So the bell rang and I'm going to go to a second round of questions, but I do want to suggest that you need to relook at this because, 7 in a year, I know that there have been a number of complaints and serious concerns. I think that there was one that we dealt with a year ago that was extremely serious. And we were surprised at how long it took. Now, again, I understand that a revocation and suspension is a serious act. Revocation is different from suspension. Suspension, to have a total of revocations and suspensions be only 7, I'd be surprised. If you had revocations at 7, I would understand. But suspension of activity on dangerous places, especially those who are repeat offenders or repeat violators. I definitely think the department has to look at that. It's an important tool to assess. It's a serious step, and it lets unscrupulous individuals or those who are operating illegally know that this department is serious about the public safety, about neighborhoods and communities and children. Council President, I'll have a second set of questions, but thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Yeah, I think we have a second round coming up shortly. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good afternoon, Commissioner. I'm going to try to thin this down. We all have the same questions, I think, and I'll try to get past that. Council approves the budget. The budget is presented to us by the mayor. We'd all like you to have more resources and personnel, but realistically, kind of given the circumstances that you're kind of confined by your boss, the mayor, and us here in City Council, what is the most realistic thing that you can suggest to us in terms of what we can do to help you do the kind of job the citizens want you to do. And I'm going to break that into two things. One is you have to inspect and ensure that those legally operating businesses are complying. But there's also all the non-criminal activity that are code violations that happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, that I don't think you have the personnel to handle that, and that, quite frankly, people don't want to do on the weekend and very late at night in possibly dangerous circumstances. What is the way that you can advise us or recommend to us that you can actually take a big bite out of that?
The first the step is to sort of identify, where the priorities are, what we're looking at, and sort of determine what the expectation is. In many cases, and I think Councilmember Dim mentioned, in many cases the investigations they're very long. There's a great deal of information and evidence gathering. There's appeal processes and such. So it's helpful to understand, it's best if we can focus our efforts on a group of things. I think what we're trying to do with our code enforcement and some of our program stuff, I think Councilmember Gaudier mentioned this, is sort of looking at specific areas in the city where we can put our resources and do what we do in a targeted and strategic way to get outcomes. So it's good to know what those things are. It's also good to know the things that may not be such a priority, things that by definition, as we're all, in government, we know that very often it's about prioritizing and resource allocation. Sometimes we have to be able to make those tough decisions. So I think knowing exactly, and sometimes it's really like neighborhood specific. What are the things that are plaguing this neighborhood? What can L&I do and do reasonably well? And what are the resources needed to make sure we do that? And I think that's we had real success with our initial door and window program. And the reason that success existed, that was a program where we sort of attached some real benefits to neighbors in terms of reducing blight and increasing property values. And the reason it was successful is because it was targeted. We dedicated resources to it. We identified the areas in the city where we were going to run the program. We had some additional staffing in the law department to be able to prosecute the cases. And that was pretty effective. And that's why I have such a high level of confidence in doing programs specific to the neighborhoods where the problems vary.
Let me ask you, or give you a example. So, in a residential area adjacent to a commercial block, there is a store, but at night they welcome people to the second and third floor where they run an illegal club. They're not licensed to sell alcohol. They're not licensed to sell anything. They sell things. People go there. They're out till 4 o'clock in the morning. They're drunk. They're on the street. And they call the police. That's not necessarily a crime, but it's a type of thing where people are just frustrated that they cannot get any answers. So there is a legitimate business operating on the first floor. It opens and closes, but on the second and third floor, starting at whatever time until like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, loud music and all that stuff. They would, I expect, want to contact L&I. L&I, if they had the personnel on Saturday night, would come out there, and what is their power to immediately shut it down?
So what you're basically describing is, for all intent and purposes, an illegal speakeasy, right? Like that's
Yes.
sort of what we refer to. And what we typically do in those, the first thing we find these out from a bunch of different places. Sometimes the police department forward them, liquor control enforcement, council offices. Very often, as I mentioned earlier, the neighbors know. They know what's going on in their neighborhood. They'll tell you if you just listen. It's the reason why we sort of try and make as many of those community meetings and dialogue with the council offices, because we get the best information from there. So they do know. And what happens is once we find out about it, we do some research on the ownership of the building. There's a lot of that preliminary work. And then our nuisance group will go out. They're out every weekend. And they'll go out, and the first thing they'll do is they'll watch and see what's going on. These can be hit or miss. They're there one weekend, they're not. As part of our investigation into the owners, we'll do some social media data mining to see, if there's a presence on social media. Very often they're cagey. But with regard to the enforcement, in those cases, it's very often an immediate cease because there's almost always a danger to the occupants. These places are typically not set up to be assembly spaces. They don't have the required exiting, the required fire alarm system. You can imagine in the event of a fire, the fire department shows up. They're not prepared to do aerial rescues of people. They're not expecting to find 25, 50 people crammed into a second or third floor bar. These are very often younger people who may not think very clearly about, hey, how do I get out of this building in the case of a fire? So almost most of the time, if there's completely unlawful use, it's going to be stopped immediately because it's almost always an extreme danger. And that's really the purpose.
Can you enhance your inspector's capabilities through the use of technology? And what I mean is mobile technology like drone cameras, video recordings, things like that.
Yeah, I mentioned in my opening comments about the remote inspection tool. This is something that lots of jurisdictions are doing. We're by no means, sort of out there on the vanguard of this thing, but it is something that does have the ability to increase productivity, to decrease the intrusive nature of inspections. For a tenant in a rental property, perhaps may prefer to have a remote inspection done using an iPhone or something along those lines, rather than have an inspector physically in their space. So that we're looking at piloting that. That's underway now. I'd love to see that expand. I think there's no replacement, unfortunately, at times for on the boots, on the ground, boots on the ground sort of inspections and people in the field. The neighbors, I think, react to that. But we do use technology. I mentioned also earlier that all our inspectors use mobile devices to record results, take pictures, record information, and find information about properties that where complaints have been made. So we do a good bit of it. We piloted a drone program some years ago. There were some complications. It was helpful in our construction and our dangerous building work because you can see the rooftops. But we've got good data in our imagery and overhead imagery that's really helpful, and it would be good to spend some money, I guess, updating that.
Thank you very much. My time is up. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Commissioner DePietro. Appreciate all the questions that you have been asked and answering. Obviously, there's a lot of redundancy in questions. We talked about hiring additional staff, but we know the challenges of getting them up and running. But is there any talk of increasing the base pay to attract more people to going to L&I inspectors?
Well, we actually we're working on as part of our racial equity plan. One of the things that we're trying to do is raise, we call it pay parity. It's something we've actually been engaged in for several years for code enforcement inspectors, to get them to raise their pay to be sort of similar to what we see on the top end of the construction inspection. Pay overall, we did this a few years ago when we looked at several surrounding communities like New York City, for example. Now, of course, New York City tends to have higher pay, but it has higher cost of living. We did this a few years ago, and that was largely the impetus for getting the construction inspector raises that we got a few years ago. Now, I think pay raises are something definitely worth looking into. I think there is a discussion about vehicle use. As I mentioned, inspectors use their own vehicles, and that can be a difficult sell for folks. It's expensive, especially now with gas. They get reimbursed for mileage. There are other things that we can do in terms of increased job satisfaction, building a career path so that they can actually move into, not everybody wants to be an inspector for their entire career. They can move into the supervisory roles. They can move into claims examination. So we're looking at it from a bunch of different ways. Pay is always one, but there's a bunch of different things in terms of job satisfaction. But largely, it's important to note that the L&I inspectors are under a tremendous amount of pressure. You all know that the public expects a lot from us. We expect a lot from our staff, and that can be difficult. Folks find it sometimes overwhelming. So yeah, we're looking at a bunch of different ways to make the job more attractive.
And we're looking at it, which is great. Is it budgeted to have these additional opportunities put for this year moving forward?
Yeah, I think this year, I think we're one of the budget asks that we had and was proposed was to sort of get us back to even on our Class 100. We got a little upside down in that Class 100 due to promotions and pay raises, which are normally good things. That's folks moving into the greater positions of authority, so that was good. But there was also a bit of it created an issue for us. So that money gets us back to sort of even, and we do have the money in terms of what we're looking to do in terms of our code enforcement side of the pay parity. And again, much like our limitation is with new hires, same thing here. It takes us time to work through those processes, to go through the civil service process, to have pays reevaluated and raised. But it's something we're constantly doing because it's, the market changes. And again, what we're seeing now, I've not seen ever before in my career.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work, and I know we harassed the hell out of your office, and thank you for always being responsive. We really appreciate it. But I noticed that, a lot of the stuff is also coordination with either the Philadelphia Police Department or the DA's office, and that takes a lot of coordination and effort and sometimes time, and especially with the clean and seal. We have been having a lot of issues, and lately we've been having some success on cleaning seal in some of these abandoned properties that often find either people deciding to move into them for squatting purposes and or dangerous fires that started in a couple of our homes that people moved into. So is there a coordination effort beside the police, even with the district attorney's office, to even see people that are doing unpermitted work or work where they do demos and damaging properties next to them? I know we have a bill out there, that adjoining neighbor bill, been working with your staff, has been great with for demos, but we get a lot of questions and concerns when the damage is done to adjoining properties, and all we tell them at this point is it's a civil complaint, nothing we could do, and it's really heart-wrenching for us to work with our residents that way. Is there something that we could do with the DA's office when people damage properties, and I know they have insurance, but then we make them go after them on their own, but there's no consequences to that?
Yeah, I think we have made referrals to the DA's office, and the folks there that we've built a relationship with are good. I am in no way qualified to speak to in terms of what it takes to prosecute someone criminally. I know we've made those referrals. There are active referrals going on. I think if it's a conversation, it's worth having. I know that it's really difficult in order to assess, responsibility. Properties are old. They have some level of defect to begin with. You're absolutely right. It's completely heart-wrenching when somebody is just trying to live their life and their house gets damaged and we can't even help them. I agree 100%. I think the DA's office, when you have repeat offenders, we've got good relationships with some folks in the community who will let us know. As I said, listen to the community, they'll tell you what you need to know. They let us know when a particular contractor shows up. That's the type of person, when they've repeatedly done this, it's ingrained bad business practice. That's the ones where we want to make those referrals and do to the DA's office. And I think, unfortunately, I hate to say this because it sounds very parochial, but you have to make an example at times, or else there's no fear of the consequences of being just completely, disregarding the neighbors.
That seems like what's happening, and then some of these contractors figure, I got done the project, I'm out of there, I'm done. Corporations dissolved, nothing you could do about it. They start up under a new corporation name. There's got to be something we could do where we could follow these owners of corporations. And and any recommendations for code amendments or policy amendments or even legislative amendments that we could do as council to better address that, because we see the damages over, and the more demos we have, which we had a big rush of them, especially the end of last year, the more damage we see. These houses are built together, and when you take one down, a lot of times it's very difficult to take one down without damaging the other one. We will be happy to work with you now as the chair of the L&I committee to be able to go through and brainstorm on how we could come up with better policies and procedures to address that. But also, is there any interest, demo permitting fees, and we know that there's insurance necessary for that. Do we see that, are they similar to other demo permitting fees in other municipalities that that maybe we could look to increase that?
So, typically, the constraint that L&I has is the permit fees have to relate to the actual cost of processing. Now, on its surface, because we know we're having such a demolition problem, and I don't mean even just the problem demos, I mean the ones that maybe are otherwise perfectly usable buildings are demolished. There is a case to be made that the permit, that it's too cheap to do. If it got more expensive to demolish, maybe they would consider reuse. Unfortunately, we can't. We're barred from sort of taking that kind of, hey, we want to dissuade people from demolishing, so we want to raise the price up to make demolition permits prohibitively expensive. That's a challenge. Now, we'd certainly love to see folks more reuse and fewer demolitions. There is a place for demolition, of course. When we have structurally compromised buildings, they got to go. But that the state prohibition on the cost of the permitting and that threshold really limits us there. Now we're about to go. We're in a program with Planning and Commerce to sort of review the fees to make sure that we're actually getting the money back for that it costs us to process. There's a lot of considerations. We're MSB and there's lights and power and water and all those things that we typically don't think of. So we're going through that process very shortly. And from that, we expect to have a much better idea about are the permit fees actually covering the work. But to your point, it would be nice to be able to sway demolitions in some way or fashion when the building is otherwise perfectly viable.
Also, I'll come back in the second round, but the last thing is to consider some type of customer service person. I know you have a communications person there, but constituents feel like they call and it's really difficult to get, not through the L&I, but to get somebody to answer simple questions instead they feel like they have to call the council person, then to get answers, and 311's kind of difficult. So if you're interested, and maybe it'd be very helpful to have some type of constituent service rep or some rep in L&I to be able to deal with them, so they're not, they shouldn't be emailing the commissioner and a lot of these inspectors directly, where they could have somebody answer these basic questions to get the pressure off of you guys. I think it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Good. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Council President. And thank you again, Commissioner DePietro. I just wanted to circle back to one of the questions that Councilmember Gim talked about regarding L&I being a revenue generating department. And so when L&I cites someone and the fine is paid, where does the money go? And can the money we receive from the fines be used to increase the number of inspectors we have?
So everything that L&I takes in goes into the general fund.
Yes, and
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, it's all general fund. There's a different designation for departments where the money can go back. L&I's not one of those.
Okay, and do you believe if that was the case, would that be helpful to your ability to staff up the department and increase the number of inspectors we have?
I know there's two schools of thought on this. I know I've spoken to other agencies that fund a portion of their work through like permit fees or license fees. There's always the danger that when those fees drop or when activity drops, you will lose that funding and therefore wind up losing positions. I'm sure there could be some level of. That's why they typically don't have, like in Las Vegas and Clark County. They did that at one point, and when everything went haywire in 2008. They took an absolute, it was devastating to their departments. They had to lay off a bunch of staff when the construction dropped. So there are likely ways, like maybe a portion of the licensing or a portion of the fines that could go back and fund the department. But that's a much broader conversation that would require bringing folks far above my pay level to understand how you go about getting that designation for a department.
Okay, that's helpful, and I'd certainly like to follow up on that after this particular hearing. I quickly wanted to go back to the issue that I know a number of my colleagues have raised regarding the number of inspectors. I asked this question of the police department yesterday, and I just wanted to get it on the record with L&I and with you relative to the Nuisance Business Task Force, the inspectors that are dedicated to the Nuisance Business Unit. And as I stated, we had gone out with Renee Reinhardt and Deputy Commissioner Carasquillo earlier this week, and some of your other fantastic inspectors, including Terrell Smith, who was out with us back in August in the 5th District on that fun night in your district, CP. So how many inspectors are currently budgeted for FY23 just for nuisance business activities? And based on what we've been seeing thus far and sort of the proliferation of these stores that are unlawfully selling drug paraphernalia without the proper licensing and permitting and zoning and community approval, do you think we have enough currently in our current structure to address all of those concerns?
I think with respect to the nuisance, because they draw from the larger pool, there's 45 code enforcement inspectors that potentially could support nuisance. We haven't been budgeted for any additional inspectors on that side. Now we do have, as I mentioned, 2 groups of 20, 10, and 10 that will support. I think what would be helpful is to sort of increase the cooperation that we're working on with the police department to make sure that we have the additional support there to do that. I think that's been really helpful. The police have been responsive. I think it's very much appreciative. I think that we didn't particularly budget any additional inspectors for that, again, because we're pulling from this existing pool of inspectors. The real question is how far do we want to go? How much more quickly do we need to do this? And maybe even what should we not be doing in favor of supporting or bolstering the nuisance property response?
Okay, and so that was really the question, because I want to make sure that we are addressing adequately in this budget cycle the amount of inspectors that are needed, not only for the Nuisance Business Task Force and for nuisance businesses and code enforcement issues, but also for the construction side. I'm recognizing that, as you stated, we've had an uptick in permits and construction activity all across the city. We all have received a number of complaints, and my office works very closely with Lisa Adams. I mean, we are in communication with her daily, and she is just phenomenal and stellar. But we know the challenges, and we know where we're seeing these issues, and I just want to ensure that in this budget process that we are including the right amount of Class $100 to ensure that we can address these issues moving forward. I heard the bell, but I just wanted to end on something you mentioned relative to how you all are collaborating with the police department and with health and others to make sure that we can adequately do this work. And PPD has made this commitment. We have an inspector level person on the task force that's sort of coordinating with the districts where you all decide, you're going to do enforcement activities for that time. But again, I just want to make sure, because again, it's embedded in their staffing that they could assign someone. But for L&I, you may be pulling someone from another area or from something else. If we need to have additional inspectors, I want to ensure we do that through this process, okay? And so thank you, Council President. I will honor the clock and honor the time, and I will circle back for a third round just with my last set of questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Council President, and thank you very much, Commissioner, again. I wanted to follow up on the horrible fires that happened both, obviously, as we know, in Kensington, as well as the earlier one in Fairmount of this year. 21 people, many of them children, this year have died in fatal fires. Last year was a significant high of 37. Certainly in terms of the Kensington one, that happened with an unlicensed rental unit. There's no question that in plenty of areas with the limited number of inspections that are happening, it feels like a free-for-all, especially on unlicensed rentals currently. So, as you know, the recent row house fire that claimed the lives of Alexis Rios and his 2 children is an example of an unlicensed rental unit that had not been inspected by LNI, did not have functioning smoke detectors as is required, that could have prevented this horrible loss of life. So I think one of my questions is that we have a number of tools that have been made available to identify unlicensed properties. So you can cross-reference, I believe, a bunch of data, which includes offsite tax addresses, utility accounts potentially. But more recently, we have PHL Rent Assist. PHL Rent Assist distributed $250 million to over 40,000, maybe 50,000 different households. And they did not withhold money based on whether a property was licensed or not. They absolutely know which properties are licensed, and so could you. So what are we doing with this information then to identify unlicensed rental units? And what are some new tactics that we could do to hold them accountable and bring them into the fold?
So rentals are one of the more challenging things that we handle. And the reason that they're challenging is the rental license really is more of a registration. It's simply telling us where an owner lives versus the person that's actually in the property. And the purpose of that is so when we find something wrong, we send them notice that you've got to repair, fix the windows, whatever it may be. Most of the rentals, in fact, the vast majority of these are single-family dwellings. And now that's another particular problem. And that problem creates two additional ones. Very often, like we know when we get complaints, we have the occupants, very typically the occupants consent. They're calling the complainant because something's not fixed. Right? Thousands of those complaints come in. We typically can get the occupant to let us in. In these other ones, they're much less inclined, and very often they won't make a complaint. And so, for fear out of losing their situation, no matter how bad that house might be, it's their home. So there's a lot of hesitance to let sort of the department do these inspections. And just for pure numbers, to be frank, if we were to do anything like a large-scale rental license, you're talking like hundreds of inspectors because we know of at least 70,000 rental licenses. That number right now, it's about 7,000 because I said we're in the renewal phase. That will go up to 80,000, and that might account for 200,000 units. Yeah. So there might be another 100,000 units out there to inspect.
Yeah. Do we know where those units are?
We know always where a license was issued or renewed or not renewed. We can track those.
Okay. And then I guess one of the questions is it a penalty to operate an unlicensed rental unit?
There isn't necessarily a penalty from the L&I perspective. The code basically says if you have a rental and it's not licensed, you really aren't permitted to collect rent. There's a process for that, and the courts have upheld this repeatedly.
And you don't have an ability to fine an unlicensed rental unit. Is that correct?
Well, the way we would find it, if not by complaint, then by either looking at past records and saying, hey, it was a rental last year, they didn't renew this year, send them a letter, something along those lines. Now, very often they don't, they may just stop renting. They may have sold the property or someone, or they moved in themselves. Yeah. So it's really very difficult. The real way we've looked at a number of different metrics for like gas bills and water bills, and it's very difficult to find those. There's definitely some work to be done in this rental area, but I don't think
I'm trying to think of, so we have all these different properties. Like we actually know, these landlords who are unlicensed received in some cases, on average, $7,500 per tenant. So they got thousands and thousands of dollars through our PHL rent assistance program. I'm wondering whether there's like some kind of an amnesty program. I'm looking for something new or different where a letter goes out, it's very clearly issued. I don't know whether you have the capacity to attach a fine. I have no idea what the penalties are, but you could outline them and say that they will be, removed if there's evidence that in the next X number of days that you determine this property moves towards rentals, and we see how many we can bring in and then zero in on the others. But, I want us to be careful because we clearly have an enormous amount of need. And that should set our goals. That should set and establish what the department's responsibilities are supposed to do. It shouldn't drive us away from it. And it's almost like the greater the need, the less we want to do something. And that is not a healthy way for any department to be able to approach urgent issues around public safety, right? So, like, if the need dictates the department's priorities, staffing, and budgeting, and obviously you have a tremendous amount of need, but there's no question that if that need is growing, something needs to change, that needs to be different. We have more tools at our disposal than we've ever had. I'm going to be looking, and I'd love to follow up with you on this, to talk about what we do with that PHL rent assistance information. It is the greatest database that we've ever had on renters and rental properties in the city of Philadelphia. It's comprehensive. We have ownership. We have, occupancy, tenants, number of people. We have need-based issues. We have demographic information. And that should be used in our favor. Not, again, I can't force on you all these, I can't expect you to deploy. I do want to hear something different that you're going to do with this information, because the need is urgent and the consequences, as we saw in the fire, are unbearable. So I'll look forward to following up with you on that. But I would urge you to have a conversation with our team at PHL Rent Assistance. I do want to just put on the record, do you have access to that information? Are you aware of it?
Aware, but I don't have access. We don't have ready access.
So we should set that up, and we would like to follow up with you on all of that. All right. You can continue. I my time is up, but your time is not.
The first thing I think we should probably do is run that list against what we have as known licenses.
Yes.
And then we can come up with a difference, and then we have an idea of how big a lift that might be.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you very much, Council President. Thank you, Commissioner.
Hey, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom, did you want to come back for a second round?
I did. Member Green may have questions. First round.
Oh, okay. Councilman Green. Okay. Hey, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Commissioner, for your work. I know a number of my colleagues have commended your department, and I know L&I traditionally has not had the resources it needs to do all the work that's required under our code, and your office doing a lot of work with not all the resources, but doing yeoman's work to address the issues in our city. There's been conversations this afternoon regarding the most recent tragedy, and then also the Fairmount fire that occurred as well. I've had conversations with both property owners and also former officials from the city regarding this issue. And we know there's a affordable housing challenge, some would say crisis in our city. There are a number of people that are living in properties that are not registered with the city of Philadelphia. I've heard from some property owners say because of the new regulations that's forcing more of the legitimate owners to sell properties and creating a greater universe of underground properties. And also the question of single room occupancy locations in the city that we know exist, but are, and it's from my research, only a few locations that are illegal. Has there been any conversation or thoughts, as we've seen in other cities, to look at that issue of how we bring in those properties that are underground into the mix, or providing or looking at legislation or other ideas allowing SROs to come in to be regulated by the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah, the fear that we have with those sort of underground rooming houses is it's no one could deny that there's a need. It's clear that there's a need. We'd much prefer them to have some type of opportunity to become legal. Now, again, I say this because I'm not in the council office when neighbors come and complain that they don't want rooming houses next to them. I fully understand that. But simply from a selfish L&I perspective, we'd much rather there see there an option to legalize them and even go on to be some sort of annual, biannual inspection, because rooming houses, single family homes, there's a lot of risk there. There's even more risk in rooming houses. You have many different people with many different belongings, all operating independently of each other. At least in a home, there's typically some level of order. They have some attachment to the home. They're going to be careful with it. Rooming houses are risky, and the code recognizes that across the world. It's not just in Philadelphia. So I'd like to see, again, from selfish L&I perspective, an opportunity to legalize them and bring them out and allow us to do, because, we hear this, our inspectors tell us they see the same people very often after they cease rooming house after rooming house. Well, this tells you they have nowhere to go. They just can't disappear. They need a place to go, and it's far better to have a place that's out in the open, that's above board, that's properly licensed, and that we can inspect, rather than have one where everyone in there is afraid to call for help or even say anything about, someone's cooking in one of the bedrooms, which is very common in rooming houses. So that's the biggest. We can chase it all day long, but the incentive to stay on the ground is much greater than the desire to come up, because there is no mechanism to legalize very often.
So how are your peers in other cities dealing with these issues, rooming houses, SROs, to address the issue, and how you balance the issue and concerns of, property owners, residents, constituents who are concerned about these locations in close proximity, but then also the issue of the challenge of affordability, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in cities, not just Philadelphia, but around the country?
Yeah, so I've seen such a variety of enforcement all around the country of the way they handle rooming houses. Now, typically they do something, right? Whether that's a third-party inspection, meaning as an owner, you can't get your license until you have a private inspection company come and do an inspection, and you upload a document and we give you a license. That's one end of it. The other end of it is some places where the municipality does the inspections. But in every one of those cases, there is a mechanism to legalize those, right? The discussion is around the zoning code and where would you allow rooming houses to be. That's a much broader question that we have to bring in the folks from planning and such. But I see the enforcement ranges across the board when it comes to them. But I think generally folks in the code community agree this is an area where, if you look at some of the worst fires that have happened, they're rooming house fires. There's one in New York just a couple of years ago, 14 people. That's not unusual. That's not unusual at all. That's almost far too common because of all the things we spoke about. So if there's anything that needs to be, in fact, I can say we haven't done a rooming house program since COVID. We're about to start one now. And just really quickly, what we do is we go through all our database of any place that ever was a rooming house, had a complaint about being a rooming house, was formerly a rooming house that we shut down, and we go back and we revisit to make sure they haven't returned to that. And all too often, that's what we find. They open back up after some level of time. I understand it. The occupants are really, they're in the middle here. But the danger is such that we really just can't ignore it.
I know Councilmember Jones has raised the questions regarding Airbnbs, which has been a challenge and concern. There's also been a challenge of new kind of underground gatherings, either nightclubs or speakeasies, especially coming out of the pandemic and because of the limited resources that L&I has had from an inspection perspective. Many of these locations are open at the wee hours of the morning. And how has L&I been trying to address that issue? Because it seems to be happening more and more, some in Airbnbs, some in other locations, where they're just opening these events and locations that are causing problems in our city, and our constituents are concerned about them.
I think you'll see some change in the Airbnb. The most recent limited lodging bill, I think, will probably have a fairly large impact on that. Because basically, if it isn't your home that you're Airbnb, meaning the one you live in, you're going to need zoning, and so that that's going to have an impact, because lots of those places are not going to be able to get zoning. Because in essence, they're going to have to become they're going to have to get zoning as a hotel if it's a home that you're renting, that you're not living in, that you're renting through Airbnb. So I think there'll be some impact there. The real issue I see very often with Airbnbs is the behavior of the folks in there. That's something that L&I really doesn't have much of an ability to do anything about, because it tends to be much more criminal fights, shooting, underage drinking, that sort of stuff. It's stuff that the police department typically needs.
And so my time is up. So I just have just one kind of closing question. Are most of the speakeasy / nightclubs that are happening unregulated? Are they happening mostly in Airbnbs? That's question one. And then the follow-up is, has there been any push to do any legislation at the statewide level? Because I know there's been issues recently, as we all saw in Pittsburgh, Airbnbs. I know talking to some of my colleagues through the Pennsylvania Municipal League and other cities around the Commonwealth, they've had these concerns about Airbnbs. Has been any conversation at the state level to try to address these issues as well?
Your first question, the speakeasies happen in virtually every occupancy. We see them in vacant gas stations and warehouses. Any place where a tenant moved out for whatever reason, we find them. And they can be kind of tricky. I think Councilmember O mentioned like on the second and third floor above a legitimate store. So we find them all across the board. With regard to legislation, I'm not aware of anything at the state level. There may be. I'm just not aware of it. I know that we're in the process of enforcing the most recent Philadelphia one, and we'll see what kind of effect that has.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair now recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Commissioner, just have two quick last questions for you. The fees generated by L&I, do they exceed your budget?
So in terms of fees, pure fees, yes. As I mentioned, I think this year so far we're about $68 million in revenues, just as of March. And of course, our operating budget is $24 million plus the other 13 for demolitions and
so, are you aware of a court case, Rom versus Board of Supervisors, 1977, state of Pennsylvania?
Yes.
I'm just going to read two comments from that case. Fees charged by a municipality for services performed as part of its official functions must be based on the cost of the service to the municipality. And the other part I'm going to read, a municipality cannot use its power to assess license and permit fees to raise revenue for general governmental purposes or to frustrate, without legitimate causes, the activity which the fee is charged. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that case is clear that the cost of L&I should not be a revenue generator. Have you heard this before?
Yeah, traditionally that's how we approach our licensing, assessing the cost for our permitting and our licensing. That's why some would say that they're so cheap. In some cases they are.
Right, but right now it seems like our revenue is exceeding the expenses, which should give you the tools, I would think, to speak to the administration about adding to your department or going outside to get additional help in order to improve the public safety. So that's just one thought I wanted to share with you. Second is, am I understanding that rental property licenses in the city, we have 60,000 actually licensed? Is that accurate, or am I wrong about that number?
Right now, the number, the last I saw was 62,000, but we're in the renewal period, so we're renewing. So in another month or so, we'll have the final number. It tends to end 74 to 84,000.
Okay. And
that's
then
individual licenses, and each license may be multiple units, because sometimes there's 2 units, sometimes there's 300 units.
And we estimate there's about 300,000 rental properties basically in the city?
That's the number that we've heard from the census.
Okay. And so that means that roughly only not even a third of our properties are licensed, correct? And that license...
It's 300,000 rental units.
Right.
So again, a large building has one license, but might have 300 units.
Okay. How many licenses do you think how many properties are not licensed? Like what you're saying is it could have 50 units and one license.
I'm sure there's a significant number, but my guess is, and all our data, and from the years of sort of looking at this, most of this is going to be single family dwellings, one home, one family in that home, and that's what sort of contributes to all the difficulties we spoke.
It's the row homes that are being rented, basically. Because the multifamily owner can't take the risk and collect no rent for 50 units. He can't take the risk, or she can't take the risk. So here's my question. Isn't there a technological solution to this? our real estate tax bills are mailed to the address, I guess, of the property owner. Could we have somebody, from a tech standpoint, match up the properties that are in the city to where the tax bills are mailed, and we can determine how we could actually go after those who are not licensed, which would also give, I think, the revenue department the ability to collect on other taxes that they're probably not paying us for either, whether it's gross receipts or other things they're not doing. I mean, just thinking about the dollars, you're talking about tens of millions of potential dollars that the city's not getting from these unlicensed properties.
Yeah, the thought about sort of enforcement of that, we generally our perspective is there's about 75% of all properties are licensed. So there's that 25% that aren't. But we sort of know that the level of effort to get those single-family dwelling license, it's about $56. The level of effort to go into that is fairly high, and so it becomes a sort of a return on investment. Now, it sounds kind of harsh when we're talking about public safety, but from a pure perspective of just dollars input and for outcome, it gets kind of risky because we're spending a lot more than $56 in order to get back a $56 license, and that's not taking into account the taxes and everything that comes along with that. So, but it is a pretty significant expense to undertake. And then I don't know. We've looked at, as I said, we've looked at this a bunch of different ways. Revenue information is pretty well protected, so that's a little bit of a challenge using that information. It's very highly protected as it should be.
But I would venture to say, and my last question is that the 25% that are not licensed are where the problems are from a public safety issue. And even if it costs us money, instead of being revenue neutral, it's probably well worth it for us to go after them. Because they're the ones that are in violation, is my guess.
Yeah, and certainly we get lots and lots of complaints, and very often, as I mentioned, some folks will complain, other folks are afraid to complain. Those are the ones you have to worry about. Right. They're afraid to use the service, they're afraid to see L&I show up. And, you don't want to contribute. Remember some years ago, we had done so many ceases, we were actually sort of, in many ways, contributing to the homelessness going on because, sometimes you can be too effective. Right. So that finding that right balance is the real challenge, I think.
All right, well, listen, keep up the good work, you and your team and your department. Thank you very much for being here today. And thank you, Council.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson for round 3.
No, Council President, I placed in the chat that I'll reserve the balance of my questions and I'll submit them in writing.
Oh my God, you get okay. I'm gonna remember.
I want to honor the clock. Thank you.
All right. Well, you were actually the last person, based on what we have here. So, yeah, that's right. We do have another part of the. Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you for being conscious. Okay. Commissioner. I call you Commissioner. I want to thank you so much for your testimony today. Thank you for the work that you and your department have done. We look forward to continue very, very significant dialogue on any way that we can enhance our ability to service the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. Thank you so much. Okay, next up, the next hearing for today, Mr. McDermott. Who's our next witness?
The next witness to testify is Water Commissioner Randy Hayman.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner?
Hello.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your walkthrough on last Friday. We really appreciate commissioners getting out on the street and, getting real feel. I got to tell you, the people really like you. But, sometimes that means that they're going to want you to come out there every time there's a problem. So be careful. All right. Well, thank you, Commissioner. And thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being on today. You could just give your name for the record and you can start your testimony.
Yes. My name, Randy E. Hayman, Commissioner, Philadelphia Water Department. And thank you, President Clark and members of the City Council for allowing me to testify this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. With me today are Donna Schwartz, Deputy Commissioner of Operations, and also Melissa Labuda, Deputy Commissioner of Finance, and other deputies and department heads who will add to our discussion as needed. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide testimony regarding PWD's fiscal year 2023 operating budget. I'm honored to be here today representing more than 2,000 employees of the Philadelphia Water Department who work around the clock to ensure the delivery of safe, high quality, and reliable drinking water and the treatment of wastewater and stormwater to protect our rivers and streams. As you are aware, the Water Fund is an enterprise fund of the city and is comprised of revenues generated through charges to our customers. The Water Department's operating budget is a component of the Water Fund, and it's this operating budget for which this testimony is being provided. Today, the Water Department is facing significant challenges, many stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. With me speaking about COVID-19, I want to take a moment to say thank you and all the respect I have for our employees. We really had to pivot quickly when it came to dealing with the COVID-19 situation. Some employees were able to work from home, but we had a group of employees that work in the streets or at the pump stations that had to come in. And they've been diligent and determined, and really has made the difference in our ability to provide safe drinking water. But we have faced challenges. Operations and maintenance costs have increased and are expected to increase further. For instance, we are projecting chemical prices will increase by 20 to 50%. We drew down significantly on our financial reserves to continue operations during the pandemic, but we have less flexibility to respond to unforeseen events in the future. The department must address aging facilities and potential failures or failure points and increase the rate of emergency repairs and replacements. However, we are beginning to be impacted by the supply chain issues that you hear about on the news, which are now delaying some of our projects. We also know that ongoing compliance and upcoming changes to regulations and permits will impact PWD spending, including the need for new positions to meet our regulatory requirements. The proposed fiscal year 2023 Water Department budget totals $466,486,023, an increase of $20,056,505 over fiscal year 22 estimated obligation levels. Now, this increase is primarily due to Class 100 increases in labor to provide for, among other things, labor agreements, regulatory compliance, and transfer of capital positions to the operating budget. Class 200 for consent order and agreement and major maintenance costs at the plants, and Class 300 for increase for chemical costs, as I mentioned above. The department remains firmly committed to water affordability. To date, there are approximately 46,000 customers benefiting from our income-based water billing assistance program, including the tiered assistance program and the senior citizen discount. We have devoted additional resources towards promotion of our customer assistance program and more recently to Commonwealth's low-income household water assistance program. We've expanded our outreach by partnering with the Mayor's Office of Civic Engagement and Volunteer Service through the Community Resource Corps. In this pilot program, Corps members are available to provide direct assistance with the application process. Demonstrating their incredible dedication to our core services, our water operations crew repaired over 700 water main breaks so far this fiscal year. We experienced 2 transmission main breaks in residential neighborhoods, as you are aware. The first on July 25th, 2021, at 6 in Bainbridge in Queen Village, and the second on February 9th, 2022, at 56 in Springfield in West Philadelphia. All water main breaks cause some amount of neighborhood disruption, but breaks of transmissions cause extensive flooding and damage to the community. We must make sure that we have the needed funds to operate quickly, to go in to address these problems when they happen, and to do it as fast, as promptly as we can. The department remains committed to improvements in customer service. Our ongoing work in implementing the Advanced Meter Infrastructure, or AMI system, has begun to deliver enhanced customer service capabilities, giving customers early warning of water leaks and help mitigate unnecessarily high bills. The department will also continue to improve the customer contact center operations in fiscal year 2023 to expand customer service or self-service options to reduce call and email volume around meter appointments and real estate transactions. The bottom line, we want to be more transparent. We want to make it easier for customers to contact us in the way that they're most comfortable and for us to respond as quickly as possible. Finally, I'm very pleased to share for fiscal year 21, Philadelphia Water exceeded its 33% participation goal of our contracts, achieving MWDBE participation rate of 38%. This translates to more than $63.7 million in business being awarded to minorities, women, and disabled owned enterprises during that period. It is our hope that our continued support of Power Corps and the high school apprenticeship program, along with our college recruitment efforts, especially those of historically black colleges and universities, will contribute to a diverse pipeline of future PWD employees. As part of our consistently reliable ability to provide drinking water at a very high standard, our 3 drinking water plants continue their compliance with the Partnership for Safe Water. As a result, I am proud to note that our wastewater treatment plants are expected to be recognized by the National Association of Clean Water Agencies for regulatory compliance through 2021, and our Southeast water pollution plants earning a Platinum Award, and our Northeast plant and Southwest plants earning Gold Awards, once again being acknowledged at a national level for doing the job right. Now, we are taking necessary steps towards investing in our future. It's imperative with all that we have to do that we put pen to paper and strategize before problems arise. The department embraces integrated planning as a means of prioritizing limited ratepayer funds for the most beneficial, cost-effective projects. This allows reasonable and affordable schedules to make progress towards long-term goals consistent with the department's mission and vision. Our water revitalization plan has identified 400 individual projects, including key projects at our 3 water treatment plants and within the distribution system to update and expand the existing infrastructure and improve safety and redundancy. These are projects that are very much needed. The department is currently working on an update to our wastewater plan to provide long-term direction for improvement to our 3 water pollution control plants, pump stations, and other components of the wastewater system. The Green City Clean Water Program, as you know, has finished its year 10 milestones, and I'm glad to say that we met them all. And now we have a situation where to date nearly 800 green infrastructure sites are in a dozen neighborhoods, resulting in 2.7 billion gallons of combined sewer overflow pollution that didn't make it to a stream or to a river. That allows us to be approximately 21% more improved than we were 10 years ago when we started the program. We were and we continue to be a leader in green infrastructure for the country. When considering our linear assets, those assets under the street, those that I mentioned earlier that have broken in recent months, the sewers and mains, a significant portion of Philadelphia's system will reach its end of life by 2050. Philadelphia Water is increasing the amount of water mains and sewers targeted for replacement and renewal. For instance, for fiscal year 2024 and beyond, the water main replacement goal is 42 miles per year, double the average replacement over the last 26 years. So we're trying to do more to keep up, or at least to eliminate as much as we can the water main breaks. Climate change. We recognize climate change will pose new challenges to water pollution in the future, and we're preparing to do as much as we can to address it. We have a full-time climate change and adaptation program that is looking at ways to protect our rivers and infrastructures as well as reduce our own fossil fuel use, helping to ensure that long-term resiliency of our investments. Our adaptation approach starts with using the best available climate science and modeling techniques to assess our near and long-term vulnerabilities and risks for climate change, including rising sea waters, increasing precipitation, and higher air temperatures. The bottom line is that at Philadelphia Water, we don't treat climate change as a one-off situation. We use the best science that we can and develop policies and review procedures that allow us to make sure that we incorporate climate change protections in all that we do and protect our infrastructure as best we can. As described in the examples I just shared, which account for just a small portion of the department's work this fiscal year, Philadelphia Water is consistently working hard to operate in a manner that is cost efficient, operationally effective, and thoughtful of our environmental and economic impacts and responsibilities in the present and in the future. This funding will allow us to continue to meet our essential our charge of providing water, wastewater, and stormwater services that are cornerstone of public health in Philadelphia. In closing, I'd like to thank the department's workforce and whose efforts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they work hard to keep the water running, the sewers clear, and our waterways clean, and contribute to an improved quality of life for everyone who lives, works, and visits the Philadelphia region. Thank you for allowing me to testify, and we welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Heyman, for that comprehensive report. I listened to it intensely, and it covered a great many aspects of what you do with the Water Department. I want to additionally thank you for allowing my staff to tour some of your facilities, the water treatment plant on City Avenue, to see where the magic happens. And it's not magic, it is science. It is a science where actual scientists convert river water into drinking water and process wastewater back into rivers. It is an amazing infrastructure that we've developed here in Philadelphia. We've come a long way since we used to tease ourselves about Schuylkill Punch. It is recognized as some of the best quality water in the region and even in the nation. So thank you for you and your competent staff for what they do.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off with saying about so we're doing a number of water main replacements. Some of the feedback that I've gotten is, yes, we put new water mains in, but the laterals leading to the house are old. And could you tell us how we're putting in the water mains and then reconnecting them to the laterals? And does that cause stress on those individual laterals, thus causing failure individual houses?
Okay. First off, I want to say that when we replace a water main, if by chance they have a lead lateral, we will replace the lateral for the homeowner. Now, I think, and that's important, and the reason that happens, if we've learned across the country that if we cut the line at the property line, all that does is shake up the lead particles in the pipe and releases more lead into the home. So we find it best to replace the entire line for the person. I think you're asking, in replacing our main, do we damage the lateral? Is that what you're asking?
So when we replace piping, we only replace the piping that is in the city's domain. But there is piping that goes to the individual property owner. Sometimes that is old as well. And it's like if you fix a little bit, it kind of puts stress on the older portion of the sewer line. So how does that work?
Okay. I will start off, and I'll hand it off to Donna Schwartz, our Deputy for Operations. That lateral is the homeowner's responsibility. It's their property. So as long as if we removed the main properly and did not damage the lateral, and it happens that the lateral is also 100 years old, the homeowner will be responsible for the lateral. But Donna, I want you to add if there's anything else that you wish to add to that statement. Donna?
While Donna's teeing up, the insurance policy you got to recruit the American Water Resource, how is that holding up to protect homeowners and the costly replacement of that kind of infrastructure?
Well, it's that too is something that's become very popular across the country, because replacing a lateral can cost you $10,000 or more. And so what happens is, by having that policy and paying a low monthly amount, when there is an issue with your lateral, they will come and make the repair, just like having a policy for your car, for maintenance on your car. So we advise people to take advantage of that as best they can.
So I'm going to yield the mic. I believe Catherine Gilmore Richardson is the first one. Member, are you there? Member Richardson.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, colleague, and thank you so much to Commissioner Hayman. It was good to be with you at the Tap into Resilience at the water conference we were at together just a few short days ago, and just appreciate all the work you all are continuing to do to represent our city so well and to continue to be an international leader on so many issues. I wanted to start by talking about some of the work that we've been focusing on around the Environmental Protection Agency Local Government Advisory Committee. And, I've worked with several of my fellow committee members to submit recommendations to EPA regarding guidance on the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure package. And a lot of the funding coming through EPA specifically is going to be water-based. And so I wanted to know how you all are evaluating available funds, specifically in your department and outside of sort of the work that's happening with the overall committee that's been assembled. And if you all are strategizing around the workforce development opportunities that will present itself as a result of some of the projects that you all can vie for, recognizing that we have a number of necessary updates that we need to take advantage of, and dollars that we know will be coming into the city. So I just wanted to know your position and sort of work around the infrastructure package to start out.
Okay. Well, one, we're still in the process of getting a handle on exactly how much money is going to come in. We're working with the city's different offices that are meeting regularly through the mayor's office, and we're getting information as far as what the amounts of monies that will come in. But also, too, it's important to understand with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it's going to be very helpful. We're very appreciative of what we're going to receive, and we're excited about it. The needs of the Philadelphia Water Department alone are in the billions of dollars over the next 6 years. Okay. For example, I talked about the water master plan. Well, what happens with that? That's a 25-year program, $2.5 billion by itself. And that's going to allow us to do the 400 projects that need to be done regarding the infrastructure. One of them is going to include replacing, tearing down and rebuilding Queen Lane, which is a Herculean task. So again, the Philadelphia Water Department alone, our expenses of $1 billion or more over the next 6 years. While the federal investment in infrastructure is welcome, our existing needs far exceed the available funding. It is our understanding that a significant amount of the funding will be distributed to the state revolving fund, which will be through Pinvest. There's an issue there in that Pinvest applications for financial assistance may result in grants and forgivable loans are low-cost loans. Under the current Pinvest guidelines, the city and Philadelphia Water does not meet the threshold to qualify for the grants and the forgivable loans. So it looks like we would get the low-cost loans. Now, we're trying to have discussions to follow up to see if there's a way to make any changes with that, to lobby and try to make changes, but that's where it stands at this point.
Okay, well, Commissioner, can you send that information to all of my colleagues, and so we can follow up regarding that matter? I do understand that some of the funding will be formula-based, but a number of the projects will be competitive, specific projects that we will have to vie for. I've seen several of them come down the pipeline in our weekly digest for LGAC and SCADS, and I'll certainly follow up with you all prior to our in-person meeting in DC in June, but I just want to ensure that we recognize that a number of these opportunities will be competitive and not formula-based, and so it will be up to us to vie for these projects to address some of the long-standing infrastructure challenges that we face that my colleague Councilmember Jones just mentioned and talked about, and the issues that you have so aptly noted around the different areas in Queen Village and also in Southwest Philadelphia. Really quickly, one of the main requirements for the Water Department is implementing the CSO consent order in agreement, and so all of us know that is Green City Clean Waters, and so we know we just celebrated the 10-year milestone, and we know that from here we'll face a lot of challenges around achieving our green acre targets. And so can you provide us information on how we're evaluating the effectiveness of the program, and if we're looking at any additional upgrades or edits so we can ensure we meet the program requirements, and if there are any policy changes that need to be made to ensure that we're making it easier for you all to address CSO?
Yes. I'll start off now. I'll hand it off to Mark Camerata, who works on the green side of Philadelphia Water. We've done well. I mean, what I talked about, us reaching our 10-year milestones and eliminating 2.7 billion gallons of pollution, that's wonderful. But we also have been able to obtain low-hanging fruit. And so now going forward, it's going to be harder to find the opportunities. So we're going to be looking at the private-public partnerships. We're going to be looking at working with the parks, working with the board, with the school district and all. And it's going to be harder to get the low-hanging fruits that we need, or the fruits that we need to get the acreage that we need. Now, Mark, if you would you add on to that?
Yeah, just thank you for the opportunity. This is Mark Camerata, Philadelphia Water, the Deputy for Planning. I do like green, but I have a lot of other planning initiatives I need to focus on too. And I think what's important is to talk about how the program, our combined sewer overflow program, is not just green infrastructure. I mean, it is reliant on traditional infrastructure, tried and true infrastructure, not just what we're doing for capacity enhancement and pump station modifications and what we do at our treatment plants, but getting creative and thinking about storage and tunneling solutions, and the program, although it gets a lot of attention because of green, does have the ability for us to integrate traditional infrastructure. It is an adaptive management program. It is a very ambitious, visionary program, and we'll keep an eye on our targets as we move forward and try to make the appropriate engineering decisions, financial decisions, and that really comes down to coordination. I mean, every project we do has to be coordinated with the city. If it's a traditional project, if it's a green infrastructure project, it really comes down to partners, whether it's siting projects, whether it comes down to local maintenance, whether contractors. So we're just constantly thinking about ways to just get the best projects out there to meet, the needs that we have. And we do have a lot more to do with incentives program, thinking about how private can support the delivery of green infrastructure. We own very little property, right? Public lands where we can site green infrastructure. So the private side is very important. What the commissioner was alluding to is we've done a lot of projects on the public side, but as you have to deliver more and more and more, you need a little more, you need to try to get off street a little bit. So really thinking about private property and as a location to manage stormwater is key.
No, I heard the bell, and I'll honor the clock, and I'll come back around for a second round. But I definitely want to ensure that we are looking at any policy changes that will be necessary, moving forward into the next decade of this work around making things easier for you all to continue to address CSO, recognizing the challenges we have seen in the city, and ensuring that we can adequately, meet that work. Okay, so I'll circle back on the second round with a number of additional.
Thank you, Member Richardson, and we know you're on top of the environmental issues for Philadelphia. Chair recognizes Member Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Commissioner Hayman for your testimony and the work that you have done. Also, just wanted to let you know I do still have my full book. This was a phenomenal event, and just giving some personal background, what we learned about your background from St. Louis, and I have some, my fraternity was represented from, my fraternity brother Jim Ellis, and the work he's done in the Philadelphia Department of Recreation, and really exposing young people, especially people of color in particular, to swimming, and a lot of the information that I thought was very interesting in reference to that exhibit. So definitely thank you for that work. I just have a couple questions that I have. First, I wanted to get a perspective regarding the bipartisan infrastructure bill, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Councilman Gilmore Richardson raised that question. Are you working collectively as part of the administration on that? I know, Mike Carroll's been working on that to some degree, but it seems like airports over here, PGW's been working on some initiatives. Where's water? Is there a collective approach, or is it more the enterprise entities that are doing their own?
No, there's more of a collective approach as far as understand where the money's coming from, what money's coming in, and get a handle on it. Now, we still don't have all the figures of what to actually expect, and I mentioned the issue we have with most of the money coming in from the state revolving fund, that a lot of what we're going to get is the low-cost loans, but we're still going to try to lobby and push to get the grants and forgivable loans to the extent that that's possible. Now, let me do this, if I could. Steve Furtek, can you talk a little bit about the federal money that's coming in and expectations?
Sure. This is real quick. Any of those dollars coming in for to improve the water quality of Delaware and Schuylkill as well?
Yeah, this is Steve Furtek, Water Engineering Manager. So far, what we've learned about the money coming in from the federal government is that it's based with Penvest to administer. And Penvest right now is a loan-only policy for us. So it doesn't look like we qualify for grants at the present moment. Hopefully that will change over time.
Hey, Member Green? Yes. They said that twice. Can you question why Philadelphia is ineligible for grants as opposed to loans?
It has to do with their calculation. I'll have my Deputy of Finance add on to this, but it has to do with their calculation of what is a needy community. And per their calculations and per their permutations, we do not fit that parameter. As a result, we get the low-cost loans. And I'll allow my Deputy of Finance to answer that.
Mr. Hammond, and Councilman Gilmore Richardson also has a point of information, but that's in reference to dollars coming from the federal government to the state going through Penvest. But what about the ability to apply for grants directly through the federal government? Because there's a whole host of dollars and opportunities that we can get, not just through Penvest. I know I've brought it up consistently. That's why it's the first question, because I know through my work on the Executive Committee of National League of Cities, there are a lot of departments where dollars are available. I know Councilmember Gilmore Richardson is aware of this as well through EPA, but there are a lot of different departments, and we as a city just do not have a coordinated approach in how we go after these dollars, and not just go to the dollars coming to the state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that are going through Penvest.
Okay.
Point of information. Chair recognizes Member Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to my colleague, Councilmember Green. Please do not count this against his time. But I had to jump in here because I am a member of the Local Government Advisory Committee for the US EPA. We have been working with them very closely. President Biden has a Justice 40 initiative that specifically targets communities like Philadelphia. There is competitive funding for the city to apply for, specifically for water, even through some of the EPA projects. I've seen them myself, and I've had two departments in the city apply for two federal opportunities, one of which will be announced soon. It's a couple $1 million. And another opportunity that another department just applied for, and I sent one to the district. And so I just want to ensure that we have clarity together that there are additional opportunities that we can apply for directly as a department directly to the federal agencies that may have opportunities outside of the infrastructure package. And if it's helpful for us to do something specific for water, working with our council president, our leadership team, and colleagues to get that information and ensure it's passed along, I'd be more than happy to do that. I mean, we've even been sharing the weekly digest from LGAC and SCAS to ensure that information has been getting over. So I just want to ensure that we say for the record that we're aware that there are direct opportunities for the city of Philadelphia, for cities specifically like us that are typically underserved, that President Biden wants to get to through his Justice 40 initiative, ensuring that 40% of the funds go to municipalities like Philadelphia so we can address our longstanding issues and challenges as it relates to infrastructure and water, climate change, and you name it. But we can address it with this package. Thank you for the leeway, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, colleague Councilmember Green.
If I may, I wanted my Deputy of Finance, Melissa, to add any additional comments regarding the federal money and put things in perspective.
You bet. So I apologize. I seem to have lost my camera. I'm not sure why. So it's Melissa Labuda, Deputy Commissioner of Finance. Yes, we are working collaboratively with the city on pursuing grant opportunities, and we also are relying on contract support to help us identify opportunities at the federal level. To give you an example of some of the things we've applied for are the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities Grant, the Hazard Mitigation Grant. We're right now reviewing what type of projects might fit under the Homeland Security Program grant. So we are looking for grant opportunities outside of just PennVest. And as described, PennVest looks at several economic factors and then evaluates how much of an impact your bill is as compared to median household income. Our bill does not meet the threshold for grants when you take our typical water, sewer, and stormwater bill and you evaluate it the way PennVest does against MHI. But yes, thank you. We would love the weekly digest. We are working collaboratively. We are working with an outside consultant, and we are pursuing direct federal grants, as I just mentioned a few. And again, I apologize for the camera problem.
Thank you for those comments. Member Green, do you want to continue?
Yes, yeah, just to follow this, thank you. And, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson and myself are both resources if you need additional support, either through the work she's doing with the EPA or through the work I'm doing in national cities. Since we were talking about water quality, what's the water department doing to improve the water quality both for the Delaware River and the Schuylkill? I am a rower. Which I was, and once again, point of information, point of personal privilege, Councilmember Jones got me into rowing, but a number of citizens in the city of Philadelphia use both those waterways for kayaking, for paddle boating, all kinds of other activities. We won't say dragon boating because us rowers don't use that phrase, but what are we doing to improve the water quality on those two waterways?
Okay. Mark Camerata, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, you look at our capital investments year in and year out, and every project we do is about improving water quality, whether that's treatment plant enhancements, whether that's green infrastructure using source control, whether that's just sewer replacement. But particularly, we're working on some pretty substantial pump station replacements, pump station expansion that will allow us to convey more wet weather flow to a treatment plant, which will reduce combined sewer overflow down in the Southwest District. We're looking at a side stream treatment project that's about 70% design, maybe 90% design at this point, which will reduce the ammonia load to the Delaware. Our Green City Clean Waters Plan is a multi-billion-dollar 25-year plan focused on improving water quality in the Schuylkill and the Delaware. So continuing to implement that program, but looking at infrastructure restrictions, plan expansion. We have a whole host of projects that are in our capital plan right now that we will use capital dollars to fund, or hopefully we get some low interest money or maybe even grant money to just continue to implement and reduce some of the burden on our ratepayers. But we have a whole host of projects that are all about focused on water improvement, wastewater improvement, and the rivers that benefit. Ultimately everything drains to the Delaware. So the Delaware is the river that benefits, in total.
And I mentioned the water master plan. We also have we're putting together a wastewater revitalization plan that will deal with the wastewater plants. And as he said, whatever we do there improves the water quality in the rivers.
Okay. I just have one last question. This is a quick aside. There are other activities on the school court. I know fishing is very prominent, especially in the 4th council district. I know in Councilmember Johnson's district is also fishing. Not sure there'll be any competition between those 2 council districts regarding fishing. The last question I had, there's been some recent concerns regarding the banning of recreational sports on the Delaware, especially based on a letter from the Maritime Exchange to City Council. What is the Water Department's position on that ban of recreational water sports on the Delaware, considering the work and the infrastructure investment you're making to improve the water quality? And so many citizens do use both waterways, but this recent letter talks about banning recreational sports on the Delaware.
Okay. Well, there's an issue, one, with the safety aspect of it, as far as the commercial channels and the ships that come through. Also, we have limited funds, and so we have to be very strategic on what plans we go forward with. Now, do we go forward with a multi-million-dollar plan on the river, or is it more important for us to get a more bang for our buck along in the neighborhoods in other areas that we need to place the money? So we have some constraints. It's our concern. There is some concern about the safety aspect of it, but also, too, what is the best priority, a prioritization of the limited funds that we have.
My time is up, so I don't want to continue to use up my time. I've expunged my time, and so hopefully I'll get some more time through the Council President or Councilmember Jones going forward.
I yield the mic to the President. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you for filling in. Just want to, where did we leave off, Councilman?
So I believe Catherine Gilmore Richardson had a second round and might be up, and then me, then maybe a member Green again. That's what I said.
Councilmember Jones, I know that I didn't get a first round.
Oh, member Squilla, obviously.
All right, here we go. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla.
Thank you, Council President. How are you? Randy, I really appreciate it. I'd like to follow up a little bit on Councilmember Green's questioning on the cleanliness of the river. And I know and I'm a big supporter of Green City's clean water, and we see the benefits of that moving forward. So my question is, and you alluded to it a little bit, is the concern about prioritizing it. And I think that's really a little bit short-sighted in the sense that we could do both. I think we could do both Green City's clean water and look at how we prioritize the overflow of our CSOs into our rivers. It's really an important aspect of us as a city to make sure we prevent as much of the overflow as possible. And other cities have done things to mitigate that. And why do you think we're not able to do both Green City clean water infrastructure work and also mitigate the overflow, and not only the wet overflow, but sometimes the dry overflow into our rivers of wastewater?
Well, I'll also pull in Mark because he has more handle on the size of the projects we're doing. But when you look at the size of the projects that we have outside of cleaning just the river itself, they are large projects, expensive projects, and it's our feeling that if you get a bigger bang for your buck, if we're able to prioritize those projects and go forward with what we have to do. Also, again, there is a safety issue that has been brought up as far as the ships that traverse up and down the river, and as far as a safety issue, as far as individuals, be it in kayak or swimming there. And then, too, there's a question of who benefits from it. Are we doing the best that we can for the city as a whole, or are we benefiting a certain segment of the city? So there's a big picture of what we have to look at. Now, Mark, we've talked before. You may want to add some other comments.
I do. I just want to say, I mean, you're talking about safety issues, and I know, listen, they do this in New York. It's probably one of the biggest ports we have in the country. But I'm talking about CSO overflows. We're talking about billions of gallons of wastewater into our rivers. Yes, it will make the rivers cleaner, and that should be our goal. So why can't we do both? And especially with this opportunity now, with grants that are available and infrastructure dollars, I think we're selling ourselves short. And I just see a hesitancy from the department to actually go in this direction. And it seems, you know, a little frustrating, at least from my perspective, that why we wouldn't consider going in both directions. And I'm a big advocate and a big supporter of Green City Clean Waters. But I also do not like, and I don't think, you know, picking up trash and debris and waste from the rivers is a suitable resolution to our CSO overflows during wet or even dry times.
Yeah, council member, if I can just add, you know, our Green City Clean Waters program is about reducing combined sewer overflows to the Delaware. We're spending $5 billion, I think, Missy, that please correct me on that number. I think that's the latest one we've used. And at the end of that investment, at the end of 2036, we're still going to have 6 billion gallons of combined sewer overflow still going to these rivers. The problem is massive. It's a massive issue, and it's a costly issue, and that's just combined sewage. That's not even the stuff that the commissioner just talked about, which is billions of dollars that investment we need to make in our water facilities and all these other elements that we need to do, all the pipe replacement we need to do. So it's not about not wanting to do both. It's really about trying to figure out what we can do with the money we have. And I do agree. I think this federal funds that may come in, we may not be able to use it for CSO related projects, combined sewer overflow projects, but maybe we use it for lead replacement, which then allows us to not have to spend ratepayer money on lead replacements, and we could go and do some additional work in some other priorities. But we're addressing, you know, we're going to need to address flooding. We're doing vulnerability assessments for climate change and the impacts to our facilities, massively aging infrastructure, in addition to just wet weather CSO control. And the CSOs are only 60% of the city. We're negotiating a permit for the other 40% of our city, which has us managing stormwater in that section as well, which is going to be another cost.
The key is this limit. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead. Finish.
No, it's what you were going to say. It's about you know, spending what we can, what we have to meet, you know, the objectives that we don't just see now, but the ones that we see presenting themselves in the future. Even the nutrient projects I mentioned. The nutrient project is trying to get ahead of a regulation that may be coming where we may have to spend billions more to deal with nutrients. So it's just about making the investments that give us, you know, the best gain at this point and set us up for additional future investments.
Yes. Well, the bottom line is when we also look at the water revitalization project, again, $2.5 billion over 25 years. We have limited funds. It's just like when we talk about the federal money coming in, and I said we have more than $2 billion worth of expenses over the next 6 years, just Philadelphia Water itself, let alone the other needs throughout the state and the city. And so we have to prioritize and make a determination what is going to get the most for us out of the limited funds that we have. And if we had a magic wand and had even more money, we would be able to do more of the things that you're pointing at, council member. But where we are, we're making the best decisions as we can, using the scientists, using the engineers to make intelligent, thoughtful decisions of what's the best way to use the limited funds that we have.
Well, we're going to continue to advocate in this, and hopefully we can find a way to do all these things. I'm going to go in, and you mentioned flooding. We've been trying to get a meeting with the water department for flooding down at McKean Street under 95 in South Philadelphia for over a year now to deal with all the flooding that's happening there. And it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal to be able to sit down and figure this out. I mean, it's not like some of the challenges you have out in Southwest Philly and other areas. And I just can't understand why, email after email, we're still not able to put this meeting together. Is there a reason why the water department wouldn't want to meet with the community to discuss this and figure out a resolution?
No, I'm more than happy to meet with you to have a meeting to discuss the situation. I think I've done that with most of the phone calls I've received when people wanted to meet. Now, there is an issue with flooding as far as if we're talking about overland flooding or we're talking about our system backing up and causing flooding. Overland flooding is a citywide issue. That's a citywide initiative. And there is a group, and I know that Glenn Abrams is involved with it, that looks at flooding and how to solve it in big picture areas. Now that's different from our system failed and we caused the flooding. And so I don't know McKinney off the top of my head. I'd have to look at it.
This is sewer backup flooding, and I mean, I've been emailing everybody. I'll copy you again on this email, and maybe we could set this up. You could see the thread goes on for over a year, trying to set this meeting up. And then I will email you right after this hearing, and hopefully
let's do that. Please do that. Now we'll set something up so we can go ahead and meet and talk. The bottom line, I want to be transparent, and you deserve an intelligent answer, either yes or no. We may agree or disagree, but I owe you an intelligent answer on what our position is. So let me do that. Send me the email, and then we'll set up a meeting, and we'll look at it.
All right, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Council President, and thank you again, Commissioner Hayman. I just have several other questions. I'll start back where I left off. Wanted to talk about the green acres. You know that we now have a lot of the green acres that come through private development, which I think is good. But we wanted to ensure that you all are thinking about how you're prioritizing environmental justice communities, especially for the public dollars that we're going to put into green acres, so that we can ensure that we are addressing the areas that have the worst CSO, many of which are those EJ communities, those historically underserved communities that have lacked investment in this arena for a very long time and have persistent issues around CSO. So how are you all working with the EJ communities to address this particular need, but also around prioritizing projects, in those areas so that we are ensuring that the water department is also centering environmental justice communities and not something that we just place on the lap of the Office of Sustainability. The second part of that question is how you all are thinking about environmental impact bonds to pay for some of the green infrastructure projects. Is that something that you all are also considering?
One, as far as where we use our monies, our funds, we look across the entire city. We want to make sure that every city, every part has a benefit from the green infrastructure. It's not just the richer areas of town. So we have a commitment to that. Our team looks at what areas we've used the money in the past, evaluates where we can use it in the future, and tries to implement it so that it's done fairly.
Agreed.
The other part,
Commissioner, I apologize. Point of information. I agree with you, and I agree that we need to be equitable in our investments. I think my primary concern is that some of the areas that we know have the worst CSO, and they've historically had this for years, those are the communities that we need to really look at. That's being equitable versus being equal in the treatment of where you place the dollar. So that was what I'm seeking to get.
No, let me say this. I agree with you. It's not a matter of every area gets, I'm making up a number, $500. If there's an area that has a major problem that's persisted for a number of decades and it needs to be improved, you prioritize it. So I agree with you. I'm not fighting you on that. And so what we do need to do is to evaluate those areas that have historically not benefited from the project, and to the extent that we can, try to address it. Now, that is an ongoing process that our engineers and Mark's group looks at as they decide where the green dollars go. Mark, I'll let you talk a little bit about how you select the areas that we go to.
Yeah, I think with a source control, kind of managing water where it falls program, you need to be in the communities. You need to build relationships with the community. And we structured our planning team and our outreach team to get to know the people who in the community where we are going to invest. And construction's construction. We're going to be disturbing an area. They're not going to be happy. But we really have an approach where we're hand in hand with the community members, council members, your staff, and environmental advocates, and we're trying to make community investments that folks appreciate. And I think to the previous point, we're seeing a lot of opportunity in the Tacony section of the Tacony Creek. We see a lot of area of opportunity for green infrastructure in the watershed that really helps with the water quality on that receiving stream. Same thing with the Cobbs Creek. And I want to mention, but both of those where we see a bit more of the environmental injustice, right? And where we have heat stress, those are two receiving streams that are not the Delaware. So it's a perfect example of if we had to redirect money for higher levels of control on the Delaware, that comes at the cost to investments elsewhere where we may be seeing, other types. I don't want to say more beneficial investment, but you can define it that way. But it's again, these are the things we need to balance. These are the variables. These are the objectives we're trying to solve with honestly a fraction of the money to solve the water resource issues that are presenting themselves to us.
No, understood. And I want to thank you, Mark. You said an important point for working with my team and with my staff and with Eliza and the whole team and meeting with the groups. We appreciate you and all the work that you all have been doing. I do have additional questions, but I heard the bell and I will honor the clock and I'll come back around to talk about workforce development and workers in the work department, in the water department. So thank you so much, Commissioner Hayman and Mark, and thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I believe Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. For my round of questioning, I want to once again say how much I appreciate your department and what it does and what it has the potential to do for communities in my district. I'd like to talk about when the new water meters were placed in. We got a lot of calls about people who wound up getting shut off because of lack of access to be able to install the new meters. Can you tell me about that process?
Yes. Yes, it is true that if you do not work with us, that there's the ability to shut the water off. But what we did, we talked about this at the very beginning, and what we were able to do is simply to tell people to inform us. Because when COVID was raging, a lot of people were afraid. We said, just inform us that you wish to wait, and we'll put you at the end of the list, and that'll bring in more time. So really, it's more of a communications process. So if they communicate with us, we're usually able to move them to the end of the list, and until there's a period where they feel more comfortable letting workers into the home or into the basement area. Now, Don, I'd like you to add to that, if you would, please.
Sure. When you say lack of access, do you mean that, I forgot to identify myself. Donna Schwartz, sorry about that. When you say lack of access, do you mean that we couldn't get access to their meter or that the homeowner did not provide access to their home?
I think it was all of the above. There were cases where people just couldn't be home to let you guys in. There are cases where they didn't get notification that you wanted to get in. There were cases in which they were reluctant to let anyone in to their home during COVID and did not know that that communications option was available. So we I was a little taken aback because it is generally the policy of the water department that you have to do something really egregious to get cut off if you live in the property. So I was shocked when we heard of these instances where people were disconnected.
Donna, if you would walk them through the process. I know we went through a number of letters, drafting several letters to inform them of the necessity to go in and how they had to correspond back to us, at least contact us to tell us that they needed more time. If you could walk them through some of that process.
Okay. Yeah, the initial contact or the initial attempt at changing out the meter was made by our contractor. as part of the AMI project. If they could not get access, then that got forwarded to PWD, and we also sent out letters and tried to get access to the property. If a person responded that they were just unable to make an appointment, or they worried about COVID predominantly, we told them that, okay, we'll take you off of the list, we'll put you at the end of the list, and we'll come back at some later time when you feel more secure about it. What we needed was someone to respond to us. If you did no response whatsoever to any of the mailings or any of our attempts to contact you, then yes, we did end up shutting off to prompt a response so that we could get in there and change out the meter. If you're saying that some people got
how many customers were there? How many shutoffs were there?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't recall.
Okay.
But if you're saying that you had some people that had no contact, we made no effort to contact them prior to shutting them off for a meter, I would appreciate if you gave me some of those names, because that seems there would have had to have been some kind of lapse in our procedure for that to happen.
I can say we were very sensitive to that at the beginning, and we had hours and hours of meetings on what's the best way to communicate, and we went through different scenarios. So I would agree that I would think there would be a small number, but mistakes happen.
I don't think you would intentionally not notify anybody. I'm saying there was a breakdown in communication. They didn't get the mail. It was forwarded. I don't know. But there are cases where people had no idea until the day of the shutoff that they were going to be victimized in that way. So I will bring those cases to your attention, but I would like to ask another question. With all of the infrastructure money that is coming our way, how is that going to impact rate increases? Is it going to mitigate those needs, or what is your prediction?
I'll give the big picture, and then I'll move over to hand it over to my Deputy of Finance, Ms. Labuda. Yes, it's a lot. We'll receive a lot of money at one time to do specific projects, but also remember that I said that our need is over $2 billion over the next 6 years just for Philadelphia Water. So it's a lot like your home finances. You can get a big lump sum check today, but you're still going to have expenses and things in the years going up. And so, it sounds bigger than it is, but the monies that we're talking about is going to be sliced and diced with different parts of the region, different utilities, and all. At the end of the day, there's still going to be a need for a viable rate. Why? Because we have so much to do. When we talked about the water main replacements, where we had 2 water mains break that very much disrupted life in their communities. We have most of our pipes, I think it's over 60% of our pipes underground are near the end of life. And so there's a need to make those replacements. We're talking about tearing down and rebuilding the Queen Lane water treatment plant. That's not just one tub of water, one reservoir. It's huge. So when you put all that together and what's ongoing, the world doesn't stop. I think we still have a very large need. It's going to take a viable rate.
So with my final exit of this, I want to shout out your workforce. I never forget the day water main broke. It was freezing temperatures out, and there was a person, might have been 9, 10 at night, in freezing conditions. He had a large beard. The water molecules had frozen on his beard as he worked to restore water to the homes in the neighborhood. I stopped. I thanked him. I didn't stop him from doing his work because there were people waiting to take a shower, but I never forgot that dedication to his work in those conditions. So thank you, and Thank you, members of your staff.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Council President. And I want to start where my colleague, Councilmember Jones, left off in thanking the workers of the Water Department, recognizing that it truly is an incredible place to have a long-term family-sustaining and supporting career in city government. And I'll never forget visiting with the Water Department workers during the pandemic under some very extraordinary circumstances that they were working under, particularly those that go down in sewers and really do the heavy lifting and the hard work here in our city. And I just want to thank them for their service. I wanted to just ask you about where you are with workforce, Commissioner Hayman, recognizing that we're facing a retirement crisis in this city. And we know that the Water Department and a number of our departments will be impacted, particularly because our water workforce is aging. And, you know, we've struggled to really attract a lot of diverse candidates. So how many people are eligible to retire from the Water Department over the next 5 years? And if you could provide a breakdown on the departments that will be most impacted, what type of positions, will be available because of this, and how are you all planning to address this issue? And after you respond to that question, I'll have a couple additional questions on workforce.
Okay. Well, Philadelphia Water is like other utilities across the country. It's about 50% of the workforce will be able to retire in the next 5-6 years. Okay, so it's a very large number. What we have to do is really what we should do naturally: encourage the young people in Philadelphia to see that Philadelphia Water is an attractive place to work. And where do you want to work? Someplace where you feel you're going to be treated well and have a chance to move up the ladder. You can get a job at Philadelphia Water and put your kids through school. And so that's what we have the obligation to do. And we're doing that with our communications department. We do that with the work that we do with the schools to teach the younger kids. But let me talk about the workforce development. I'll try to go quickly. We have the Power Corps program that works with AmeriCorps in the city to allow PWD youths who had involvement with the criminal justice system to come in and get a job. I had lunch with 2 young men who were part of that. One of them started to cry almost to tell me, Mr. Heyman, because I worked in Power Corps, I bought a house, I bought a car, I'm able to take care of my family. It is important. Number 2, we have apprenticeships. We provide apprenticeship opportunities in areas of the greatest needs, such as the trades, the titles, the electrical, plumbing, HVAC, all of that. We also work closely with the school district, and I'll say more about that. One success that we had that I told you about last year is our intern to hire program. We worked with OHR. We're able to hire people quicker. So instead of bringing them in for an internship, they have to wait a year, take their test, and then someone else takes them away. We're able to hire them quicker and let them take their exams quicker, which is great. The other one is college recruitment. My feeling is you can't keep going to the same stream looking for the same fish. You need to look other places, especially if you're looking for talented minorities. They're everywhere. And so what we have to do is go to historically black colleges. And I have done that. And I've stopped kids in the hallway who were walking by us and said, hey, would you like to work at Philadelphia Water? And then when they find out I'm the commissioner, well, yeah, they come over and sit and talk. So there's a way to find a new stream to fish in. But let me say this, too, about the school district. We have consistently been working with the Philadelphia School District Office of Career and Technical Education. We have actively recruited from Dobbins, Edson, Mastbaum, Northeast, Randolph, Roxborough, Saul, Swanson High Schools. Most CTE programs are only available at specific schools. As these partnerships continue to grow, we anticipate more outreach events at area schools. We're planning visiting already and have visited Penn Treaty, Kingston, Health Science, Central, Lincoln High. And so I say all that to say we're trying to tap into the imagination of the young people in the high schools to bring them in. We're looking at bringing in individuals who have been locked out before because of involvement in the criminal justice system, bringing in apprenticeships, and then going to the colleges. And some colleges maybe we didn't visit before, but we should have, to try to bring people in.
No, well, I thank you for that response and really for the personal work and personal touch that you have with a lot of the young people. I know you talked about that previously and know that it does not go unnoticed. I wanted to ask specifically about the recruitment relative to the career and technical education programming and all of the different programs at the different schools, because, you know, some schools are CTE schools versus a school having a CTE program. And so OHR has been working very diligently to change the job specs for some of the positions within other departments to align with the completion of that particular CTE program, whatever it may be, to align with an entry-level position in a department. Is that something that the Water Department has undertaken with the Office of Human Resources? And I ask because you talked about, you know, ensuring that we're investing in our workforce and, you know, training opportunities to reskill and upskill internal workers so they can move into positions of greater authority and responsibility. And so as we do that, I want to ensure that we're creating a pipeline for those entry-level positions, ones that do not require a college degree. So are you all changing some of the job specs to make direct pipelines to that work outside of the work you all are doing with the intern to hire program?
Well, yes, and I think it's fair to say some earlier conversations we had with you, we're looking into that to try to see if there's a way to alter the job spec to give them credit for certain life experiences and different things of that nature. I do want Jerry Leatherman, my deputy for HR, if you could join in on the conversation. If not, if Candy's available.
Hello?
I'm here.
Yes, go right ahead. Jerry, are you there?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So the question was looking at changing our job specs so that we're able to allow an easier pipeline into occupation at Philadelphia Water.
Specifically for the entry-level positions, right? Ones that do not require a college degree or higher education. So young people that are coming out of a program in the school district can feed directly into that entry-level position. And that way, once they're in the city, they will have the opportunity to upskill and receive additional training to move on to positions of greater authority and responsibility.
Yes, Councilwoman, thank you for that question. Absolutely. We've been working with the Office of Human Resources for really since 2013 when we reinstated our apprenticeship program. And really to simplify the answer to your question, we've created pathways for many trades like work positions so that we can reach out to young Philadelphia youth, bring them into our apprenticeship program as a temporary city employee, and after completion of certain skill sets and training, they then are able to pass into full civil service status without having to go sort of competitive with other folks. So we've worked cooperatively for a long period of time and made a lot of progress to simplify the civil service process so that we do have those pathways directly into full employment. So as the commissioner outlined, you know, a number of different folks, employees who have come into our employment through this process and how impactful it's been to them. And how once they are then full-time civil service protected employees, how they move up through the promotional opportunities as any other employee. So we've had great success making those kinds of adjustments.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that response. And I would just request that if you all could send us the listing of those particular positions, and then when they open or when there's an opportunity to get on the list for that particular position.
Sure thing.
Yes.
Okay, and I would love to do recruitment activities directly with the schools so that we are working, you know, directly with the schools and the students and the administrators to get them in the pipeline to help them understand how to apply for work with the city, because this will be important for us to establish a younger workforce in our city, recognizing that you said 50% of the water department employees will be eligible for retirement over the next 4 years. If you ask me, that's a retirement crisis, and we need to to be doing all that we can in the age of this great resignation, where we know young people are not, typically going into careers in civil service or wanting to work in public service, to make it the pathways easier to provide those opportunities. It also deals with the poverty issues that we're faced with in the city, and ensuring that young people have opportunities available to them directly here in Philadelphia. So I just wanted to get on the record. One additional question, the balance of my questions, of which I do have many, I will submit in writing for a response to the council president's office and all the members of council. But lastly, because, I hear about this in all of the meetings I have with some of the environmental civilian groups, is around the water department's role in helping the city better understand the impacts of climate change and community resilience. And this is something that typically comes up when we're talking about the Office of Sustainability and the work that our Chief Resiliency Officer does. But I was wondering if you all have additional data in water around our sea level rise and any increased rainfall. How are you all, utilizing this data and working with the city to use this data around planning? And if you all at water are making sure that your facilities are resilient against the impacts of climate change. And I bring that up because of, what we've seen when we had that really, heavy rainfall and, what happened downtown in 676 and some of our other areas where even the federal mapping had not been updated relative to development that's occurring and the flooding that we're seeing. And we know that that will only increase over time. And so how are we planning for that? And how are you all working with the other departments, in collaboration with the other departments to ensure that we're planning for that? And are you ready for that?
Well, let me start off. I'm going to give Mark a chance to shine, but I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder. Philadelphia Water is a leader when it deals with understanding and trying to incorporate climate change and good science in what we do to protect our infrastructure. We have a full-time climate change and adaptation program that looks at ways to protect our rivers and infrastructures, and we're able to use the best available climate science and modeling. And so that way we're able to see, okay, this is what's going to happen if we allow this development to go in. The water's rising. Maybe this is someplace we should not allow development, or maybe this is something we should do to protect the airport or other facilities that the city has. And so our doing that, instead of it being a one-off and shaking hands afterwards, saying, oh, we saved one building, oh, we stopped one project, it's better for us to have a systematic procedure where we incorporate good science into our procedures, into our processes, so that we're able to holistically incorporate good climate change science. And so, Mark, I took a lot of your thunder, but I'm sure you have something to add to that.
No, you just shined right there. That was great. Yeah, it's we say that climate change is water change, and it's variables and it's information that we need to use to make infrastructure decisions like we've been doing for the last 200 years. We have to use that information for the next 200. So it is grounded in science because we're going to see water quality impacts from sea level rise. We're going to see inundation at coastal areas due to sea level rise and these extreme events. We're, all probably have some stories about increased stormwater runoff from these massively intense rain events that we're seeing. And we could be seeing issues with our source water quality due to extended periods of drought. So knowing what the impacts are and knowing what we need to invest in moving forward, it really has been grounded in science. And Councilwoman, I think that the biggest thing is we've had a history of chemical, physical, biological, radiological information, and now we've added to the mix climatological data. And what we've really focused on is thinking about sea level rise, precipitation, and air temperature projections that we can use that are Philly centered, right? You can't take global climate models and apply them to Philadelphia. You have to figure out a way to take these trends and make them local based on the 100 plus years of information we have in data collection here in Philly. But it comes down to actually really understanding, having data points that you could use in projections. And again, sea level rise projections, from 2040 to 2060 up to 2100, looking at increasing precipitation patterns, looking at temperature projections, And then the one that's been hardest to kind of put our fingers on at this point is trying to understand what drought frequency may be and how that may affect us. That's been the hardest kind of, bit of science to get our heads around. But yeah, it's about science, and that science will allow us to put appropriate mitigation and adaptation strategies in play.
No, I definitely, again, Mark, appreciate all of your work and constantly working with our office and Commissioner for the work that you all do and for that response. We will continue to work with you on that issue relative to the data we know that's available in Philadelphia. Lastly, I just wanted to mention to you, Commissioner, that I know there's sometimes opportunities for workforce development programs to work with the water department, particularly on specialized, projects or areas. And I just want to ensure that you all are open to partnering with those workforce development providers.
Absolutely. And we have. I've had some call me and say, we have 2 people that graduated in January. Can you please help us and help them find a place? And we found a place for them. So we're committed to that.
Okay. I just wanted to get that on the record. Well, I'll reserve the balance of my questions and I'll submit them in writing. But thank you so much, Commissioner, and to the team at the Water Department for all of the work you do and for consistently working with our office and responding to our numerous inquiries. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. Council President, thank you very, very much for the leeway, and I'll submit the balance of the questions in writing.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
All right. It appears to be no additional questions by members of the committee or the witnesses. So that being said, thank you all very much, Commissioner, and your team. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your willingness to work with us as we continue to try to make the quality of life for the citizens of the city of Philadelphia much better and take us to the next level. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
There being no additional questions, this committee will stand in recess until Tuesday, May 3rd, 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene on Microsoft's team. Thank you all very much. And again, please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, CPD.